The man who had red hair and was called Norris was the emperor. One fine, warm, sunny day, he came to the estate to discuss some very important news with his older brother. He handed him the papers and said that all the language habits of the maximum were recorded in this journal and asked if she would like to get acquainted with them. The girl, who also took some papers, said that she would also like to talk about something about his brother. She said that if he reads it, he will find out that Malin was hit by a boy, and this was already the 10th time in a month. She handed a copy of the papers to the fair-haired guy who was sitting next to her. His name was Johann. He was the captain of the Knights of the Sanctuary of God. They bowed before the girl and said that there was no forgiveness for them. The men were really embarrassed that such a situation had happened at all. But the girl simply watched for a while as they bowed their heads before her, but then asked them to raise them. She smiled and said that this was the only way they could start the parent-teacher meeting. So they all needed to focus and have a cool, fresh mind. In fact, the youngest knight captain of the God's Sanctuary, whom even the highest aristocrats would find difficult to meet face-to-face, was in her office at that moment. And next to him was the emperor, who was the very sky of the empire. But even they were no exception in parental matters. So they had to participate in the lives of their children. This girl was Daphne. She was a teacher at a kindergarten called Londel. Daphne was the teacher of the Sunny class. She also ended up in the world of the novel. As for her pupils in the Sunny class, they were quite cute little children whom she liked very much. One of them was the pink-haired little girl. Her name was Maine. She was the main character of the novel and the daughter of the high priest. And also the red-voiced boy. His name would have been Maxie. He was the main character of the original novel and the imperial prince. There were many different heirs of prestigious families in this class, and the girl felt her responsibility to these children. She had to teach them everything before they went into the adult world. Of course, she would be very happy if that was all. However, as was said earlier, this is a world inside the novel, and it began with the following phrases. The main character said that she was bored. She was so impatiently waiting for her debut. 18-year-old Maylene had to go towards the terrace, and as soon as she got there, she saw an Axion on that side. This, of course, surprised the girl. But this was their first meeting, thanks to which the rest of the story happened. Of course, everything had to happen exactly like this, and not at their age of 5 in kindergarten. This definitely didn't happen in the original story. So as soon as Daphne saw them together, she was very worried. The original plot didn't just change. It went down the drain, and because of this, the girl felt in danger. She chose to work as a kindergarten teacher, which she was in her past life, just to make a living. It wasn't something to take lightly, so she really gave it her all. Daphne put in a lot of different efforts, and that's how this kindergarten turned into the best educational institution in the entire empire. Of course, no one could have thought that the main characters could meet so soon in this place, and in fact, their relationship did not work out in the best way. He insulted the main character. He called her horrible names, and the girl even beat him back because she knew that it was wrong to swear like that. Of course, Daphne tried to separate them because she understood that it would not end well. However, the children continued to fight and didn't care at all. The girl could not believe that such small children could beat each other much more skillfully than any adult. In the end, having finally come up to them and managed to separate them, she told the children that they themselves knew that they had to fight again. This was wrong, and all conflicts had to be resolved with words. But now, after another such quarrel, Daphne called their parents to her. She introduced herself and said that she was very glad that they agreed to meet with her. The girl turned to them and called them respected Apkuns. However, the emperor really didn't like the way she did it, and Johann, smiling, said that he was Milane's brother, so she could speak to him freely. One of them was the emperor, and the second was the captain of the knights, so the girl did not understand how she was supposed to treat them informally and talk freely. She certainly could not allow herself to do this. Daphne eventually thanked them again for coming, but Norris spoke to her and said in a rough voice that since he had already been called so far away, he hoped that it was worth it. After all, if it was for some trifle, he would be very angry. The girl had a feeling as if their presence was pressing on her like a concrete slab, and because of this, she couldn't even formulate her thoughts normally in order to look confident in their eyes. But she certainly couldn't back down, so she had to say that she wanted to get straight to the point so as not to delay such important and busy people. Smiling, the teacher said that at this age, children are always very active. This is the time of active development of large muscles, so they move a lot. Daphne knew a few tips on how she could flexibly arrange a meeting with the guardian. Firstly, it was necessary to scatter the so-called bait, and in principle, a lot of this bait had to be scattered so that they wouldn't get angry and leave. First of all, it was also necessary to calm the guardian. She said that there were no problems with their child. This is all within the normal range. Of course, after that, they will start asking questions. And that's what happened. Norris put it in a cup of tea and said that she did say that she would get straight to the point. However, her introduction was terribly long, so he asked her to tell him as soon as possible what the essence of the problem was. Daphne continued. She said that because of this age, sometimes they cannot control their strength and can accidentally hurt other people. As soon as Johann heard this, he immediately became wary and asked what this meant. The emperor then suddenly asked in a quiet voice, "Could it be that someone dared to touch the body of a member of the imperial family?" Hearing this, Johann suddenly laughed and said that apparently the young prince was very mischievous. Norris became even more angry about this. He warned the boy and said that if he was executed for insulting the imperial family, his younger brother would be very sad. The man answered in a calm voice that the people of the empire would be even sadder because it would be an unfair death, and they would still want to achieve justice. But the emperor said that none of those who insulted the imperial family survived, and for some reason, he decides to call it unfair. Johann sighed heavily and said that he was very sorry that the imperial house was not able to accept words of criticism. Daphne, meanwhile, was already very sorry that she had called them together. She interrupted their argument and named the children. She said that both children had fought with each other, so they were both to blame for the situation. As soon as the guardians heard this, they were very shocked. They certainly did not expect such a turn of events. Johann smiled nervously and said that it was definitely impossible. After all, we are Lin, a child who couldn't even hurt an insect, let alone beat a boy. Norris said that Maxion had been trained in etiquette very conscientiously in the imperial family, so he definitely couldn't break all of these rules at once. Daphne calmly at that moment began to drink tea. In fact, she also thought the same when she read the original. However, when she got directly into this story, she was convinced of the opposite. The girl said that at that age it was certainly difficult not to give in to impulses. But in reality, the more serious problem was something completely different. She said that if their relationship continues like this, it will be difficult for the children to get close to their classmates. As soon as the parents heard about this, they were very shocked at that moment. They became quiet. The men understood that this was a serious problem, and that it needed to be solved as soon as possible. Johann took his cup of tea with a trembling hand, and thought about the fact that the youngest daughter of the high priest was capable of shooting down a flying bird. This was all very unlike her, and the emperor himself could not believe that the only principal of the empire, which no one dares to treat carelessly, was behaving in such a way. However, if everything continues like this, then no one will dare to approach this child. Daphne, seeing the expression on their faces, immediately understood that this is exactly what they were thinking. It was all written right on them. The girl tried to calm them down and, smiling, said that she would certainly do everything possible to guide the children on the right path. However, she would of course need their help from inside the house. They will be able to fix this situation only if they act together. The men were not at all happy to hear this. They again lowered their heads and said nothing. Daphne thought that it was all because they were new parents, but still, compared to other guardians, they were just meek lambs. At times like these, she knew it was important to hold the reins tightly, so she wasn't going to back down and lose her prey. Daphne was about to say something when suddenly Johann turned to her. He smiled and said that he would definitely talk to his sister. When Norris also joined the conversation, he said that, of course, he would also talk to him and give instructions to the imperial teacher in order to clear up these incomprehensible misunderstandings. But the girl immediately became indignant upon hearing this and said that things wouldn't work out that way. Daphne told the emperor that he should personally talk to Maxion and not pass on all the important information through some teachers. As soon as Norris heard such disrespectful treatment of himself, he restrained his anger and turned to the teacher and asked if she even understood who he was. The girl replied that she knew everything perfectly well. He was the sky of the empire. The man replied that in that case, she should also know how much time he had set aside to come to this place and listen to all these things. Daphne couldn't believe that he was starting to put pressure on her with his strength again. However, she definitely wasn't going to give in so easily. With a heavy sigh, she turned to His Highness and said that since he had found the time to come to this place, she was sure that he would not be able to pay more attention to Maxion in order to convey to his son what should not be done. The girl was very worried at that moment because she knew that if he didn't like all of this, he could calmly execute her. She had already died once, so she had nothing to be afraid of. However, this feeling was still not the most pleasant. At that moment, the emperor suddenly stood up, and the girl immediately felt agitation. She understood that now he would either scold her and order her execution or treat it with leniency. The girl assumed that she had gone too far, because he was the emperor after all, and she had turned out to be too careless. So Daphne even regretted a little how rudely she had treated him. Then Johann turned first. He said that the teacher was right. The one who finds an excuse and neglects the family is truly pathetic. As soon as the girl heard this, she immediately became wary and thought that it would be better for the man to keep quiet and not tease him now. And besides, she did not understand why he made such a smug expression on his face. He presented it all as if he himself was not guilty of anything, although in fact, this was not the case at all. So Daphne decided to put him in his place. She turned to the captain of the knights and said that it concerned him too. The man did not expect this, and therefore immediately asked what exactly she meant. She said that they both needed to talk to their children about their lives in kindergarten, and that it needed to be done in person and not passed on through someone else. In fact, Daphne had already developed an occupational disease. It was a disease in which, even if she risked her own life, she would still say what she had to. A desperate struggle to resist being persuaded during a parent-teacher meeting. The men heard her words and remained silent for a while, trying to think it all through. Daphne noticed this and immediately realized that they had really thought deeply about this issue, that it was only natural that raising children was the hardest job in the world, so he had to approach it with intelligence. They didn't have time to finish the conversation because suddenly a little girl ran into the room. She turned to the teacher because she had come to see her and didn't know that her guardian would be there. When Johann saw his little sister, he immediately smiled happily and greeted her. He told her to come up to him and show how close their relationship was. Malin immediately started running to his side. However, when the man opened his arms, she simply ran past. She stopped next to her teacher and asked to be held in her arms. She began to hug her around the waist and talk about how much she loved her. Daphne greeted her with a happy smile and said that she was also happy to see her. The little girl asked the lady if it was because of her that her brother would scold her now. She made a very sad expression on her face, as if she was ready to cry at that moment. Daphne was immediately taken in by those little beautiful eyes and said that she hadn't scolded anyone at all. She had simply told him what a good girl Maylene was. She was about to say something else when suddenly a new voice came from the door. It was Maxion. He turned to the girl and said that it was very impolite to burst into the classroom without the teacher's permission. But as soon as he went inside, he saw the emperor himself. Of course, the boy did not expect to see his father in this place, so he was even a little surprised. Norris suddenly folded his arms across his chest and asked his son what kind of rudeness he was being towards his classmate. He also said that he had not expected such behavior from him at all. The boy quickly approached the teacher and, hiding behind her back, asked His Highness for forgiveness in a trembling voice, saying that he was very sorry. The girl, meanwhile, was very happy and said that Maxime apparently had big problems. But Daphne intervened in their conversation and said that they both should not interfere with her holding meetings. She believed that too many different situations had already happened for one day. The arrival of the children had reduced the tension a little, and therefore the atmosphere had to be corrected. The younger sister also brushed off the knight captain, so Daphne was very interested in watching their relationship in the future, because it was quite strange. The woman smiled and suggested ending today's meeting. She said that the children were already tired of waiting, so it was best to get them home as soon as possible so they could rest. Well, Before the men left taking their children, the girl stopped the emperor and said that she would like to discuss something with him personally, so she hoped that he could stay for a little while. After everyone left, the man looked at her in surprise and asked what exactly was going on. When Daphne came closer to him, she even had to lift her head up because the man was very tall. She told him in a voice trembling with excitement that she wanted to discuss something with him, but she herself did not understand why the emperor suddenly decided to come so close to her. This made it even more exciting for the man to continue walking forward, but she continued to take steps back. However, soon she simply wrapped her back against the bookshelf. The girl simply couldn't retreat any further, so she suddenly and accidentally touched the emperor's chest with her hands. Daphne herself didn't expect this. She didn't think that she would be able to touch the emperor's chest, so she quickly removed her hands out of awkwardness because she had no right to do this. However, Norris suddenly put his hand on the bookshelf and said that it was too old and was about to break under the weight of all the books that were on it. The man said that he would definitely call someone to fix it, but as soon as he saw the strange expression on the boa constrictor's face, he immediately asked if something was really wrong. Because the girl did not expect all this, she was really scared. But in the end, she soon calmed down and decided to talk to him anyway. She did not dare to raise this topic. However, they need to decide how to address each other. The man, upon hearing this, was very surprised and asked, why should they suddenly decide how to communicate with her? Daphne explained that the most important aspect in learning is the proper relationship between teacher and guardian. And in order for everything to work out, she would very much ask him to repeat after her the form of address that he should use towards her. After this, the girl said the phrase, Madam Teacher. The man said only the second part of this phrase. He absolutely did not want to call her Madam. However, Daphne began to insist on her own. She repeated the word mistress again and said that it was not so difficult, so he could at least try to do it. But the man still continued to call her simply teacher. When the girl repeated the first word again, he had to give in and he finally called her the way Daphne wanted. She was very happy when he did this, so she smiled and said that from now on, she would really like him to address her like that when he is in kindergarten. The man was about to leave, but she remembered that she still wanted to tell him something. She also added that it was very important, so she asked him to listen to her carefully. The girl thought that she could take advantage of this wonderful moment and go on the attack, so she would like to talk about mutual formal treatment. As soon as Norris heard this, he immediately frowned. He clearly didn't like this at all, but the girl did not understand why he behaved like that, because it meant that he should not use the informal river in the presence of children. He was silent for a while, but then Norris finally said that he understood everything perfectly well, and therefore would try to adhere to her requests. At that moment, the girl finally breathed a sigh of relief. She actually felt even a little joy from this, and hoped that these words would not be an empty phrase. However, here suddenly, Norris also turned to the teacher and asked if he could now say what he wanted. The girl replied that he certainly could have done it. Daphne even thought that he was very good at formal speech and did not understand why he was so stubborn and had not done it on purpose before. Then the man finally approached her and asked her to come to the imperial palace, at least sometimes. The girl definitely didn't expect to hear this. She didn't understand why he asked her to do this, so she asked if he really wanted her to be in the imperial palace. Then Norris explained that she could consider this a house call. Daphne thought that he simply decided to invite her over and did not understand whether this was really something from a romantic fantasy in the style of flirting, but she certainly did not want something like that because it was completely unacceptable to do this with the parents of her students. So, laughing awkwardly, she said that she does not meet alone with the guardians of the students. The man was genuinely surprised to hear this from her. He said that it was the first time he had met a teacher who would call a visit home a private meeting. But Daphne continued to insist on her own and asked if there was a reason why he insisted on this visit. Norris then said that the reason was that he needed to talk to her alone. At that moment, he suddenly straightened her hair and tucked it behind her ear, thereby appearing even closer to the girl. Of course, Daphne was very embarrassed because he approached her ear, made his voice quiet, and said that he wanted to know a lot. However, he thought that there were a lot of extra ears in this place. Basically, he wanted to know about Maxione, of course. However, he was also interested in what concerned the teacher herself. Daphne, hearing about this, became very embarrassed, and her face turned red. And the man said that, on top of everything else, she had a piece of candy stuck behind her ear. He gave her the piece he was able to get, and the girl immediately thanked him. Her voice trembled. She spoke quickly, which really showed how worried she was. Then Norris smiled and said that he thought she understood everything, so he didn't want to keep her any longer, and said that he hoped they would see each other soon. She also said goodbye to him, but she still couldn't understand why he was coming so close to her. And besides, he was saying something in her ear in a very quiet voice. The girl did not understand that he also meant when he said that he wanted to know more about her. She certainly was not going to approve of that. Therefore, it all seemed suspicious to her. In fact, a few years ago, Daphne lived in a completely different place. One day when it was raining heavily, the maids were walking along the corridors. They were heading exactly to the girl's room. One of them said that she had heard the latest rumors. Some say that the owner had added Lady Liliana to the family register. Another said that this couldn't be, because Lady Lillian was the daughter of a mistress, and she stayed in the mansion for only a month. For her, it was very surprising. However, her friends said that it did not matter at all. Lady Lillian had something special, so it was quite natural that she was flattered like that. Of course, the girl meant the so-called talent. She said that it was also the only thing that Lady Daphne could never get, even if the heavens opened up. However, her friend immediately became wary. She understood that there could be a severe punishment for these conversations, so she yelled at her friend and asked her to stop spreading these gossips. But the dark-haired maid said that even without talent, such a thing certainly couldn't happen. She also added that not only talent, but also in many other things, Lady Lily is more professional. At that very moment, the door to the room opened and they went inside. The girl didn't think that Daphne would be there, and therefore even screamed in fear when she saw her big green eyes directed in that direction. Daphne quietly asked what it meant to be a winster. She explained to the maids that she asked this because she really didn't understand what it meant to be a winster, and she felt like she would go crazy if she didn't find out. The maid immediately yelled at her and asked what the girl was muttering about. It irritated her. She said it very quietly, so no one could hear anything normally. She also said that Lady was entering rather Daphne. At the same time said that, despite the fact that they address her by her name, Lady treat her worse than mongrels. The maid, hearing this, was very shocked. She asked her partner what was wrong with the girl. She assumed that she had even eaten something spoiled. But laughing, Daphne said that perhaps this was all because she lacked the so-called talent that the maid had just told her about. After that, the girl also whispered that she was really stuck in the wrong romance, and because of that, she was a little sad. The maids heard this and thought that she had definitely started to go crazy. But Daphne turned to them again. The girl said that she has a serious professional trauma. When she sees a rude child, she cannot leave him without education. So she folded her arms across her chest and asked which of them would like to be the first to sit on the chair to think. In fact, the family of Count Vinster, into which Daphne ended up, was truly very special. All members of this family were born with outstanding so-called talent. Some had a beautiful voice, some had incredible physical abilities, and some were born with a talent for business. They all excelled in various fields. And despite the fact that the Count's family has a long history on the internet, it was precisely thanks to these talents that they were able to take their place among the central aristocracy. But for the first time in the family's history, a child without talent was born. And this child, of course, was Daphne, the girl who moved into her body. Still, the girl understood that this resettlement was a mistake. She managed to remember the plot of the original story, but now the main characters were not even born. She ended up long before the main plot. And besides, she was very upset by the fact that she ended up in the body of a completely talentless Daphne Winster, a simple 17-year-old girl who was in no way connected to the main characters. As soon as the girl moved into a new body, a beautiful girl with bright pink hair immediately entered her room. It was her sister. She smiled and saw Daphne, and said that she had been looking for her everywhere, but she was her half-sister, and her name was Lillian. She also had 2 annoying older brothers, who followed Lillian into the room. Daphne immediately greeted them all and asked her sister what the matter was. The girl came closer to her and, helping her get up from the floor, suggested that they go somewhere to eat together. The father said that he would buy them something tasty, so she really hoped that the girl would go with them. She didn't understand why they suddenly decided to show such generosity, because until now, her father had only given her dried and old food. But then suddenly, Lillian said that she would also like, sisters, to know about inviting her fiancé, Marquis Vilkine, to this meeting. As soon as Daphne heard that she wanted to invite Hardin Wilchin, she was very surprised because he had only returned to his domain yesterday. As soon as Lillian heard about this, she immediately became very upset. She did not know this information and thought about what to do in such a case. Daphne watched her reaction and didn't understand why she started to look so disappointed, because the groom wasn't hers after all. But then suddenly, one of her older brothers approached her. He said that the girl should be softer and did not understand whether it was worth it for her to say this information so rudely. Daphne had absolutely no idea what he was talking about, while her little sister fell to the ground and began to cry bitterly. However, the brother continued to yell at her. He said that he thought that he would have to endure the shame and take her with them. However, she began to irritate him, so he was already thinking about leaving her at home and even punishing her. The girl did not understand at all what was happening around him. He simply began to get angry at her for no reason whatsoever. And that was the reason for leaving her at home. She also didn't understand. Was no one going to pay attention to this? He flared up in just a few seconds and began to behave completely inappropriately. Daphne was not going to tolerate all this. She stood up and asked her brother why she had to discuss her fiancé with her. But the man, hearing this, only became even more angry. He ran up to her and grabbed the girl by the shirt and asked if she had really gone completely crazy. He did not understand how she even dared to snap at him. The girl already wanted to say something, but she didn't have time because he came into the room, didn't want to. He put his hand on the guy's wrist and told him to stop and not do this in front of the servants. Daphne was very surprised when she saw her father. The man slowly looked in her direction, but in fact, he was going to do something terrible, and the girl felt it. And that's exactly what happened. Without any reason or explanation, he just swung and hit her incredibly hard on the cheek. At the sight of the blow, redness immediately appeared. She couldn't believe that he actually slapped her over something so simple. But then suddenly, the father frowned and told the girl that if she had no talent, then she should live as if she did not exist at all. Unlike her, Lillian showed another talent. On her very first attempt at shooting, she hit the target in most parts. He said that this proves that Lily's talent is the same as the first Count of Vinster, and today they will go to celebrate it. The man was also very angry, because on a day when everyone should be happy and congratulate her, for some reason, she decided that she dared to upset his daughter. At that moment, Daphne thought that she too was actually his daughter. She was even interested in how he evaluated her, since he treated her in such a way. The girl knew that she should get angry, argue, and prove her point. However, for some reason, her body simply froze and could not move. Daphne seemed to be frozen. She couldn't even move a finger. The girl didn't understand why this happened, and because of this, she became even more scared. Suddenly, Lillian ran up to her father and hugged him, telling him not to worry because she was completely fine. Smiling, the girl suggested leaving her sister to rest and going with herself as soon as possible because she was hungry. The man did not refuse. He also suggested that she do what she likes, and after eating, go to a clothing boutique to buy her some new outfits. After that, they simply left the room, leaving the Daph. But one girl thought that with such behavior, they show the fact that in this house, she was more insignificant than even an insect. In order to at least unwind a little, that day she decided to go out and take a walk in the forest in that place. No one could disturb her. It was her secret place where she could hide. Unlike her room, at least this place didn't stink or leak water. Daphne seriously considered whether she would feel better if she started smashing things to calm herself down. The girl saw a small pistol next to her and even thought that perhaps she should try to shoot. That's exactly what she was going to do, thinking that it might actually be easier that way. Taking the pistol in her hands, she took aim and soon fired. After she did this, she was very surprised. She had never shot from such a weapon before, so as soon as she felt this strong recoil, she was surprised because it turned out to be much stronger than the girl thought. Daphne could barely hold the pistols in her hands. Then she looked to the side and noticed the target she was aiming at. The girl saw that she hit the target right in the center. At some point, it even seemed to her that it was just luck, because she couldn't believe that she could do it the first time. Daphne was also happy that she felt a little better now. The sound was louder than she expected, but everything was even okay. She believed that if she was caught again, she would definitely be beaten. So she wanted to return to the estate as soon as possible before all her relatives returned. Until late in the evening, the girl was in the residence of the Marquis of Vilchen. She wrote down various important information for herself and studied new information. When it got completely dark outside and the girl was already a little tired, she stretched on a chair and decided to take a break from her work. Daphne picked up a candle and went into another room. She tried to remember what the date was, because while she was working, she didn't notice how quickly so much time had flown by. Lessons on how to be a bride during the day, paperwork at night completely exhausted her. The girl even suggested that her relatives were simply using her as a servant. Despite the fact that it was already quite late, Daphne decided to go outside and get some fresh air. However, at that moment, she passed by Hardy's room. She immediately became interested in what was going on there, because she heard a female voice laughing and talking about Hardy's stopping. This girl also said that at this rate her lips would just crack, and she didn't like it at all. The man who was pushing her against the wall asked for forgiveness and said that she was so beautiful that he just couldn't hold back. Daphne immediately went to the door. She was going to see what was going on there, because this guy Hardnitz was her fiancé. And when he turned to the other side, she saw a girl next to him, and this girl was Lilia, her half-sister. The girl couldn't believe that it was all true. Lily continued to giggle and said that she was probably very beautiful and even more beautiful than her sister. The man, as soon as he heard that she was talking about Daphne, immediately said that the engagement with this gloomy woman was simply a way to marry Lilin, of course. When she heard about this, she couldn't believe it. It was a really big blow for her. Even though she practically didn't know this person, she still felt very unpleasant. He continued to kiss Lillian and moved closer to her. Meanwhile, they were already lying on Lillian's bed. She said that it was very difficult for her to come to terms with this, even though she knew this information. The girl said that he himself understands that she is jealous. After all, no one knows how things will turn out in the future. The man replied that it was hard for him to even think that the daughter of the main wife was born without talent. It was a pity, and God has this too. Well, Lilia did not agree with him and said that at least she was not bad at paperwork, so they used her perfectly for their own purposes. The girl also believed that it was best for her to continue in the same spirit and not get involved in any other industries, since she had no talent in any other. Daphne could not bear to hear all this any longer. She could not resist and dropped the candle from her hands, after which she ran out into the street, throwing a cloak over her shoulders because it was cold there. The girl tried to hold back her tears. She ran with all her might. At that moment, her head even started spinning a little, because she didn't believe that this could really be reality. At some point, she even felt like she was about to vomit. However, she had not eaten anything, and accordingly, her stomach was empty. She had never felt such pain before. Daphne ran for some time, finally stopped, and, out of breath, tried to comprehend everything she had heard and learned. The girl couldn't understand how her character could tolerate such a relationship all this time. It was definitely beyond the pale. But at that moment, she heard the sounds of an approaching horse, and also the cry of some young guy who told the lady to run away to the side. Daphne turned around to see what it was, and the moment she turned her head, she saw that the horse was galloping straight towards her. She fell and died very quickly. However, immediately after that, the girl woke up screaming in a soft bed. The maid who was next to her immediately turned to the girl and asked the mistress what had happened, because she had scared her terribly. But then, seeing that Daphne had already completely woken up, the maid said that since she had already regained consciousness, she would like to tell her one thing. The girl asked that she stop losing consciousness all the time. It was too inconvenient for them, so she needed to learn to control herself and her health. At that moment, Daphne looked around and asked if she was really in her room. The maid didn't even answer this, because she considered these to be stupid questions. The girl herself did not understand what was happening because she was sure that she had been hit by a carriage. She sat for a while and tried to accept and understand this situation. Then she turned to the maid and, to make sure, asked what day it was. The maid got even more angry about this. She screamed and asked, "Now you can't even count the days after this." She said that it was the 4th day of the imperial calendar. Daphne couldn't believe that she actually said that it was the 4th number for her. This was something very unusual because she clearly had the certainty that it was the 29th. At that moment, the door to her room opened and her groom came in. He saw that Daphne was sitting on the bed and asked if everything was okay with her. Now, he suddenly smiled and, coming closer to her, said that she suddenly fainted, so he was very worried. When she saw Hardy's, she was very surprised. Of course, the girl did not forget everything that he said to her sister, so she got angry and asked what he was doing in this place. The guy pretended as if nothing had happened and asked what she was talking about. After all, they ate together today, so it was obvious that he hadn't left so quickly. Daphne then thought that if he really did come to the Count's estate, then that day really was the 4th day on the imperial calendar. And for the girl, this also meant that she had returned in time before her death. The girl really wanted to collect her thoughts. However, this guy just couldn't shut up. He kept telling her something, and because of this, she even got a headache. Daphne turned to the hard man as she got up from her bed and asked if he could leave since the man was being too noisy. She explained that listening to his voice made her feel like she was a fool every second, and so she strongly recommended that he just leave her alone. The guy certainly didn't expect to hear something like this. He asked in a trembling voice what she meant and how she could become dumber from his conversations. But as soon as he saw her even more displeased expression, he said that she probably still felt bad, so he left, saying that he would definitely like to see her later. After the door closed, Daphne thought that if all this was not a dream, then she had only one thing to do in her life, and that was exactly what she was going to do. At that very moment, 2 maids were talking behind the door. One of them asked the other if she had heard the news that Lady Daphne had gone mad again. Her partner said that she had heard about this from other servants and did not understand why the girl could not just live her life peacefully. But at that moment, Daphne, who was passing by them, asked in a rough voice, did they really not have work since they were talking so actively? The girls did not expect to see the lady, and because of this, they were very scared. They bowed, asked for forgiveness, and said that they were already returning to their duties. But she walked past them and told them to move aside, because she needed to talk to her father immediately. The maid tried to block her way and said that the Count was very busy now, and if she wanted to hand over the documents, they could take them instead of her. Daphne looked at them with an icy gaze, which immediately made the maids feel uncomfortable, but they still tried not to let her go ahead. The doors of the office suddenly opened, and the Count appeared from there. He asked everyone present what kind of commotion they were causing. She already pointed towards the lady and told the Count that she wanted to break into his place. However, she didn't even have time to finish speaking, all because she had approached her father a long time ago and said that he had come out of Pavel just in time from the need to go inside. He looked at her with indignation and asked why she was looking for him at all. The girl decided to get straight to the point. She handed over the previously prepared papers and asked him to remove her from the family register. At that moment, the groom ran up to her from behind. He grabbed the girl by the hand and asked what was going on and why she needed an application to exclude herself from the family register. I continued to hold her hand. He said that this was all clearly due to illness. He believed that she was not herself, so she could not make such important decisions. He simply suggested that she ask the Count for treatment, and then she should definitely feel better. But the girl removed her hand from him. She didn't like at all how tightly he held it. She said that now her thoughts are much clearer than his, and asked him to stop grabbing the girl's hand without permission. She explained that this is called sexual harassment, and warned that he could even be held accountable for this. After that, she took some more papers that she was holding behind her back and said that she also had something for him that she wanted to give. It was a letter about the annulment of the engagement. She explained that she did not need such a husband and gave this paper to the guy. The girl said that this was a so-called gift from her. When the man saw this, he was sincerely amazed. He asked what it was, but the girl suggested that he try reading the letter about ignoring the engagement. He couldn't believe that she was actually doing this to him. He asked in a trembling voice what that was supposed to mean. Daphne explained in a confident voice what it meant. She was calling off the engagement. The maids, like her fiancé, were very surprised at this moment. Lillian, who was nearby and heard all this, also decided to intervene in their conversation. She ran to her sister and asked what was going on. But Daphne laughed and said that she was very glad that her little beloved sister had decided to come after all. She moved this man closer to Lila and said that she took him as her place and her fiancé. The girl said that everything she threw away suited Lilia much better, so she would gladly give it to her. The girl didn't even wait for any answers from them. She just turned around and started to leave, deciding that there was no point in staying there. At this point, the maids immediately began to talk to each other. They concluded that Daphne had really gone crazy. However, they did not understand why she had given her fiancé to Lady Lily. The sister herself was very angry at her stepsister. She did not understand why the girl did this, and was even more angry because of it. She was angry because now all her plans had gone awry. But by that time, she had already gone up to her attic and closed the door. She breathed a sigh of relief. She really just went and did it. At that moment, Daphne was very proud of herself. She couldn't believe that she actually dared to do something that she had never dared to do. She thought that she had better get out of this damned house as soon as possible. If she stayed there for even a second longer, she would definitely go crazy and would no longer be able to do anything normally. She went to the closet to collect her things, because it was better for her to leave with at least a minimal set of things than with absolutely nothing. But when Daphne opened the closet, she suddenly saw that there were absolutely no things there, and only one notebook was lying in the middle. The girl was a little surprised. She immediately took the notebook in her hands to see what it was and what it said. When she opened it, she saw neat handwriting. It was written that today someone was convinced that she, like the first Earl of Vinsander, had the same talent. Daphne understood that if we were talking about the talent of the first Count Vincent, then it was Lillian who possessed it. In this body, she did not feel any special abilities. The girl decided that perhaps, if she read this diary, she would be able to understand at least something. While Daphne had a little extra time, she sat down on the floor and began to read what was written there. Out of curiosity, I fired from a pistol installed at the shooting range. All 20 shots hit the exact center. I also secretly played my father's violin and was able to perform the melody that I once heard on the street. I wanted to learn, so I stole my brother's book on the language of the kingdom of Kuman, even though the letters were unfamiliar. Soon I could read them with ease. As soon as Daphne read about talent in languages, in business, and everything else, she was pleasantly surprised. The girl couldn't believe that her real character actually had all these talents. Now, when several years have passed since that moment, and the girl became very successful, she entered the family of Viscount Belchester. She ran away from her family and trembled somewhere in an alley. The Viscount appeared before her as a savior and sheltered her. But since the family's finances were very meager, the girl took and got a job to be useful. The almost destroyed kindergarten Lendell was where they took her at first. This place scared her terribly. However, she decided that luck simply pushed her like the wind. As magical engineering developed throughout the empire, knowledge and skill increased in each. Even aristocrats who once considered learning and work shameful now began to immerse themselves in education. The academy, which was once a place for aristocrats to socialize, has become a real educational institution. And kindergartens also attracted a lot of attention because they were responsible for even earlier education, which was also important. How many years later, the empire was engulfed by a boom in kindergartens, and its center was, of course, Daphne. One fine day, when the girl was heading to work once again, she passed by a small town. There she was stopped by an elderly woman. She turned to the girl and asked for forgiveness for stopping her on her way to work. But the woman said she wanted to know if she could attend the charity masquerade ball that evening. The woman said it was very important. Daphne smiled and said that she would be happy to do this. However, she was afraid that she could be recognized there, and that could also cause problems. The woman thought about it seriously and said that she was right after all. If it bothered her, then of course she could not think about it. She also said that perhaps nothing could have happened, because it was a masquerade after all. Daphne, having heard about this, nevertheless agreed and said that in that case there would be no problems. She was ready to go to this event. The girl believed that perhaps because she owed a lot to Viscount Belchester, she could not bring herself to refuse anyone. So when she went to the masquerade that evening in a pink dress with a beautiful mask, she decided to consider it just over time. Daphne didn't like that event at all. She was very bored there. She thought about how, when she returned home, she would have to sort out reports and make a schedule for the month. Well then, suddenly, she heard children's voices not far from her. Some boy screamed loudly, said that he had stepped on his foot, and asked his friend to immediately apologize for it. Of course, where there were children, Daphne appeared directly. She looked out from behind the corner and saw a black-haired boy who, indignantly, said that he had not stepped on it at all. Well, two of his other friends started to protest. He told him not to dare contradict him. They argued about who was to blame for this situation. Having long ago seen that the dispute turned out to be quite serious, and noticing that several had united against one, I became very wary. Then one of the boys, who was the loudest, suddenly shouted and asked the dark-haired one he was accusing and whether he had given up who he was. The kid was ready to cry because of all this. He said that he didn't know, but that boy got even more angry. He swung at him and didn't understand how he even dared to snap back. Daphne understood that if everything continued at this rate, the children would hit him. She certainly could not allow such a thing. So she put her glass of alcohol aside and started walking forward to separate the little ones. But at that moment, one of the women who was standing next to her stopped her in a whisper and said that it would be best for her not to interfere. The woman said that it was best for her to stand still, as all the others, these three, were children of the central aristocratic houses. The woman said that she was certainly very sorry that this unfortunate child was being bullied. However, she believed that nothing could be done about it. Daphne certainly disagreed with this statement. She said that these children looked to be about 8 years old, but the woman still advised her to just stand quietly and not interfere. She said that because they were central aristocratic houses, it certainly would not end well. The girl certainly disobeyed her. She came closer to the children and shouted loudly, calling them violators. Daphne told them to stop immediately and stop doing this. The children who heard the scream behind them immediately looked back, not understanding what was happening. Seeing the woman, they immediately became indignant. The guys turned to her and asked who she was, and one of them asked if she really didn't know who they were either. At that moment, the aristocrats, having heard all this showdown and seeing that Daphne had approached the boys, were amazed. They thought that it was very brave of her to do so. However, not everyone was of this opinion. Some believed that this was not courage at all, but rather stupidity and unjustified stupidity. The boy who was the instigator of that whole conflict told the girl that his father was Marquis Gopin and asked if she had heard of such a thing by any chance. He said that he would definitely tell him about all this. But Daphne replied that he could certainly do that. She wasn't even against it. After that, she took off her mask and, throwing it aside, said that it would be best for Dana to call him. After all, she hadn't seen him for a long time and had already wanted to talk several times, but she just couldn't do it. The boys saw who exactly this woman was and were very surprised and immediately felt very ashamed and awkward. It was, of course, their teacher Daphne. As soon as the other aristocrats heard about it, they immediately began to whisper to each other. They realized that she was from the London kindergarten. It was that same famous teacher who did an excellent job with children. Daphne immediately turned to the 3 boys named Daniel Hachul and Leap. She asked if they didn't know how to properly greet their teacher. The girl also asked if she hadn't taught them that it was completely wrong to corner someone with a whole group and bully them. The boys were ready to burst into tears from fear. They understood how everything had turned out differently than they had expected, and were afraid to even say a word. As soon as Daphne saw their expressions, she smiled and asked why they were shaking so much. Were they really so scared that she scolded them after so much time? The girl was so carried away that she didn't even notice that someone appeared behind her. She said that they, little rascals, should have known this before doing such things. However, the tall, muscular, dark-haired man who appeared behind her turned to Bantudu, the same little defenseless boy that everyone had attacked. Yes, she quickly turned around to see who it was, and then she saw how this boy ran up to his older brother and hugged him tightly. The man asked in a rough voice what was going on there, and his brother immediately told him everything in great detail and very emotionally. Daphne was genuinely amazed as soon as she saw this man. She would never have thought that he could be his brother, with such an overwhelming aura. Then she also looked around and saw that all these gossips in an instant closed their mouths and simply silently watched everything that was happening. Banted at the same time also said that they had a fight, and the man, hearing about this, became even more angry. He looked down on everyone and tried to get at least some kind of explanation from them. Daphne took the initiative. She greeted the man and said that she was the teacher of these children. It was a small quarrel. Their parents would be here soon, so they would definitely listen to all the complaints. But at that moment, the man sighed heavily, suddenly turned away, and said that he had no doubt that they would crawl back very soon. She also bowed before him and said that it was not a quarrel, but a one-sided bullying as their teacher. She sincerely apologized for such behavior. She was very sorry that his younger brother had to go through such a thing. Then she turned to all the children and said that bullying could not be called a mistake. This time it was entirely their fault. Then she suddenly looked to the side and saw her parents already approaching. She said that they were already on their way, so now a serious conversation awaited them ahead. And with them. As soon as he saw such a result of everything that was happening, he suddenly smiled. He said that it was very good. When I saw this, my parents immediately realized that it was either Marquise or Goten. Then one of the men began to calm his child and asked if he had mentioned Marquis Gopin. But the tall, dark-haired man replied that Gopin was a pathetic fool who couldn't even control his own child, and asked if he really thought that was what he should have said. The man didn't like it at all. He asked if he had really gone crazy and if he knew who he was, since he had changed and was talking to him like that. The man began to take off his mask and said that he was not going to listen to this anymore. He knew that his son was bullying his younger brother. The guy asked if the Gopung house taught you to start a fight you can't win. He also thought it was all just absurd. As soon as he took off his mask, his interlocutor was sincerely surprised, as were everyone present, because they knew this man very well. In fact, this man was Duke Caden Helber. Of course, as soon as the man saw him and recognized this person, he immediately bowed before him and offered his deepest apologies. Daphne, as soon as she saw that the most arrogant mark of the Gappa bowed his head before the man, was very surprised. But in general, this is exactly what she should have expected, because the Duke's position is much higher than that of the Marquise. So it would be very strange if he did not do this. But still, the girl did not recognize this person. His last name certainly sounded very familiar to her. However, she still could not remember where she had heard it. All this time, Daphne looked at Caden and tried to remember where she could have heard this. And as soon as the realization came to her mind, she turned white with fear. And all because this man was supposed to be the Grand Duke Hildebord. In fact, everyone treated Banti very cruelly. They called him inhuman and called him names, saying that his appearance was disgusting. However, now when Daphne met him in person, she was very surprised. After all, this sweet boy even communicated very politely with his brother. The girls found it strange to accept the fact that he was supposed to be the Prince of Cruelty, this cute little Bantate. She immediately became interested in what should have happened to him, since he grew up like that. At that moment, a woman suddenly walked past them. She accidentally tripped and fell. The boy turned to his brother and said that someone had fallen there, but the man was not at all interested in this and asked what had happened to him before. Baiteat said that they should help her, but his brother replied that he should not solve other people's problems, so there was no need to help her. At that moment, Daphne immediately understood why the boy had grown up so angry and everyone treated him terribly. He had probably adopted his brother's character. They stood in silence for a while. Then the girl turned to the man and asked if she could add anything else. The man did not understand why she spoke again. However, he still allowed her to do so and asked what exactly she wanted to say. His frightening aura was not a joke at all. However, the girl could not just stand there and endure all this. She should not remain silent. She turned to the man and said that he should leave the child alone with me, especially at his age, when it is easy to attract the child's attention with something spectacular. I must have explained that he should be very careful and always keep an eye on his younger brother, because it really could have ended even worse. Only the people around heard this were very amazed. They could not believe that the girl had gathered up her courage and had just counted out the Grand Duke and said more than a few words. They didn't know if everything would be okay with her. They thought that maybe this teacher would definitely have a hard time right now. For a while the man was simply silent and looked at her. Daphne herself did not answer anything. They simply met each other's eyes and did not say anything. Finally the man smiled and said that he would definitely be careful. After that he called her teacher. The next day, when Daphne was in her estate, she was very sorry that she had not managed to talk to the man longer. Yesterday she was squeezed like a lemon. Therefore she simply avoided him. It was impossible to let the villain from the original Bantade go like that. However, she could no longer do anything because her time had already run out. At that moment, one of the workers suddenly entered the girl's office and, seeing Daphne, said that she had to look at some documents and it was urgent. The girl saw some small book and was very surprised by it. She asked why she suddenly brought her a book. The assistant said that she found it while cleaning the library. It was written in an ancient language, so she couldn't even read it. She also explained that she was wondering if the girl knew anything about this. Daphne immediately picked up the book and noticed that the title was indeed in another language. But in fact, it turned out not to be an ancient language at all, as the worker assumed. It was Korean. She was very surprised to see this language. Then she asked if she could borrow this book for a while. The employee immediately said that there was no problem with this. She would just have to return it before the start of the faculty meeting. Daphne immediately ran in the other direction. She didn't understand where a book in Korean could have appeared in their library. She hid in a remote storage room and wondered whether it was a book at all or something else. The girl opened the book and saw that there was a short story written there, and she immediately saw the name of her character. But it also said that Daphne was the most evil woman in the whole world. She always and everywhere said that she would kill the saint. As soon as the girl read this, she was very surprised. She did not understand why she suddenly had to do this, because she worked a lot and was too busy for such nonsense. Well, then the girl read about how her neck ended up on the guillotine, and everyone gathered to see the last minutes of her life. For using black magic, which was banned in the Empire, Daphne was sentenced to death. In addition, the Imperial Knights were to be sent to the Grand Duchy of Hildebrand to those who collaborated with her in order to punish them too. As soon as the girl read about all this, she was very surprised. Daphne could not believe that she was sentenced to death for using some kind of black magic. She tried to understand why it said something about the Grand Duchy of Hildebrand, but then, after thinking a little, she finally remembered what exactly it meant. After everything that happened, the girl called the boy's guardian to her because she needed to discuss something with him. She would like Bantier to start attending their kindergarten, and that is the reason why she invited him to her place. She handed him the papers and said that the great Geert Kaidan should have thought about this situation, because in this place, his younger brother would definitely be given a good education. She asked him to carefully read these papers and give her his answer soon. The man, hearing about this, immediately thought about it. He took the papers in his hands and began to study them. Daphne herself at that moment really hoped that the man would still enroll his son in this kindergarten. Well, because she wanted to prevent his little brother from becoming the main villain of the story. So, it was definitely done only for the good, and she had to stop him from going black because of Kaiden's death. So sending the boy to this kindergarten would be the best decision in this case. The man studied the papers carefully for a while, but soon after he put them aside and said that he refused her offer. Yes, Daphne heard this, and at first she didn't even believe it. She couldn't understand why he decided to refuse, because this opportunity was truly wonderful. The girl began to tell him about all the positive aspects. She said that their kindergarten is a professional educational institution. She was absolutely sure that it would be very useful for the boy to be in this place, and that he would be able to receive a decent education. In a completely calm voice, Kaiden replied that the boy was already receiving professional training, and he did not need anything new. Daphne understood that she was losing this wonderful opportunity, so she was going to somehow convince him and still invite him to this particular kindergarten. The girl turned to the man with force and said that it is also important for the child to spend time with children of his own age in order to broaden his horizons. Developing social skills was the foundation of a child's growth, so their kindergarten was the perfect place for that. Daphne noticed that when the man heard about this, he immediately reacted. Of course, nothing could be more disturbing than a child's relationship with his peers, so he knew that this was a really important part of communication. At that moment, Caden suddenly began to unbutton the top buttons of his shirt. The girl, seeing this, immediately became very embarrassed. She did not understand why she was doing this. I tried not to show it, and therefore, smiling, I told him to take another look at the documents and think carefully about this proposal and his decision. Kaiden actually took the documents in his hands, and the girl at the same time also said that if Bontiate goes to kindergarten, he will be enrolled in her class. Well, after some time of silence, the man said that the problem was that Bantate was his half-brother, and the man was worried that he would be bullied because he was an illegitimate child. Daphne, hearing this, immediately smiled and reassured the man. She said that he definitely didn't have to worry about this. She also asked him to look carefully at the last page of the documents that she gave him. The man immediately began to turn over all the sheets of paper and reached the last one. As soon as he read this, the man was very surprised and turned to the teacher and asked what it was. Daphne replied that the children from her class wrote letters to greet Bantate. They themselves decided to take such an initiative and show how happy they would be to him. Caden was genuinely surprised and said that he understood everything. However, he still started arguing with the teacher. He told the girl that he was a little worried about the fact that the name of the Bantate, without his knowledge, for some reason was changed to Baktain. In fact, Daphne hadn't even noticed this before. And as soon as he pointed out this mistake from Malin, she felt very uncomfortable in front of the man. She was silent for a while because she simply didn't know what to tell him. But the man spoke first and said that this letter was really very impressive. Daphne realized that he had only read the part where the name was wrong, so she decided to try to save the situation again. She smiled and said that very soon they would go on a spring excursion for the Bantate. This would be a very good experience in her opinion. He began to correct the name again. However, he was already saying something wrong. The girl did not understand at all why he was so petty. Daphne continued her speech. She said that not long ago, she heard news about the Grand Duchy. They say that a man is making efforts to educate people in his territory. Caden suddenly smiled and said that she turned out to be very well informed, but he added that everything was exactly like that. As soon as the girl saw the frightening smile on his face, she did not understand why he behaved in such a way. This made her very wary. In order to ease their tense atmosphere a little, the girl looked away from him and said that their kindergarten was the first official early education institution in the entire empire. In addition, at this time, the empire actively financed the early education of children, regardless of their status. Caden, hearing this, began to smile again. He said that he was amazed that the girl was dressed in other territories and was also worried. Then he looked at her with his big red eyes and asked what she really meant by that. Despite the fact that the girl was a little scared, she tried to tell the man without a tremor in her voice that he should follow fashion. In order to build good educational institutions in the Great Correspondence, he must know more about the different kindergartens. This would be a great reference point for training his people. And that was why the man really needed to look into this topic in more detail. Caden, hearing all this, laughed again. He said that she turned out to be quite confident in herself. After that, he asked her to continue and explain the rules of admission to him. The girl thought that this was a very good sign, so she smiled happily and said that she would immediately tell him everything. When some time had passed since then, Bantier finally went to this kindergarten on his first day. His brother dressed the boy quite stylishly. He was wearing a black suit with a beautiful white collar and a precious red brooch. The boy was very shy. He lowered his head and greeted everyone and said his name. As soon as Miling saw him, she immediately became happy. She ran forward to him and began to call him incorrectly again for some reason. She called him Bacterin. Well, Daphne corrected her and said that what exactly is the correct name to call him, but in the end, all the kids continued to call him by the wrong name, because he had a pretty complicated name and you say it was really difficult. The girl didn't try to correct them because she understood that it was useless. She told Bantier that he should just sit next to Maxime because there was a free seat there. When the boy headed that way, she said that it was time for their next story. That day the story would tell about a night about arithmetic. Daphne immediately opened her workstation. And then, suddenly, among the papers that she was going to read, the girl noticed a letter from the Imperial Palace. She was very surprised to see it, but immediately decided to open it in order to understand what was in it. When she read it, she noticed that they had decided to change the location for the excursion. In the end, the tour was now supposed to take place in the Imperial Palace. Daphne immediately went to the headmistress after the end of the lesson in order to clarify this point. Her boss confirmed exactly this. The girl couldn't believe it. She said that they had already surveyed the area and made plans. They really wanted to go to the park and had already counted on it. But the woman explained that this was the first time the Imperial Palace had made such an offer, so they certainly could not refuse their kindness. Daphne started protesting again. She said that this meant that they would have to look at everything again and completely redo their plans. But at that moment, another teacher spoke up. She giggled and said that she had completely forgotten that she had a lot of things to do at home that day, so she would unfortunately not be able to go to the inspection. Of course, Daphne was a little upset about this, because she was counting on everyone's help. However, at that moment, another teacher spoke up and said that she could not work overtime, and the third one's C-slate was sick. In the end, Daphne was left completely alone. Everyone else was busy, so she had no choice. She told the headmistress that she would eventually do everything herself. And on her precious day off the next day, Daphne went to the Imperial Palace to do her overtime work, which of course she was not happy about. The girl also did not understand why the Imperial Palace was so far away. This upset her incredibly, and all because in that world there weren't even any taxis, so Daphne had to walk there. At that moment, she suddenly passed by one of the carriages and heard something interesting and a familiar voice. The cab driver approached the man who was going to the Helen's temple and said how much the trip would cost him. When the fair-haired man heard this, he immediately smiled and said that until they arrived at the Temple of Hylas, he wanted to be taken care of, so he agreed to this trip even at such a price. When Daphne came closer, she immediately recognized this man. It was Brother Maine. His name was Johann, captain of the knights. The girl noticed that he was smiling so brightly and didn't even notice that he was being taken for a ride, and that a lot of money was being taken for no reason at all. She couldn't believe that a simple trip to the temple could cost so much, so it was only natural that they really were trying to rip him off. So she decided to help this man a little and went forward to the cab driver and asked what he thought about a completely different amount of money. The man did not immediately hear her words, so he asked again what she had said. Meanwhile, Daphne had already come closer to them. Johann, seeing her, immediately recognized the girl. Smiling, he greeted her and said that he was very glad to see her. The girl also smiled back at him and greeted her guardian. She said that she was very glad to meet him in this place on such a beautiful day. She said that she would like to continue the conversation with him, but before that, she would like to resolve one issue. Then Daphne turned to the man who was about to leave and asked if he really wanted to take so much money for a simple trip to the temple. The driver said in a trembling voice that this was exactly how it was, after which he tried to be terrible and asked what had happened to her before that. Daphne was surprised that he even confessed on his own. She asked for forgiveness and said that she could not keep her expression after hearing such nonsense. She explained that she simply got angry every time she saw that someone was raising prices completely unfairly. The cab driver, hearing this, immediately became indignant. He thought that the lady was definitely asking for trouble, since she was going to ruin his wonderful deal. Johann himself was surprised as soon as he heard about the inflated prices. He asked the teacher what she meant. The girl then looked at the driver and asked how he even had the nerve to overcharge such an innocent person who couldn't hurt a fly. But the man continued to insist on his own. He indignantly said that for the distance the man was asking for, it was still very cheap. Daphne replied that she was actually a local, so she didn't understand who he was trying to deceive now, since she knew the prices very well. The girl told him to cut back and take only 47 fur for this trip. Then it would be fair. The man was indignant and said that this price would definitely not be enough. It would not even be enough to cover the horse's feed. They continued to argue, but Daphne still stuck to her guns, saying the same amount and not going to back down. In the end, the cab driver couldn't stand it any longer. He started yelling at the girl and asked, "Was it really too much?" He didn't understand. Why did she never budge from her number during the bargaining? But Daphne, even in response to these words, simply named her price. She said that if he continued to insist, she would take another crew for a lower price. Johann, as soon as he saw all these disputes, he immediately felt uncomfortable. So he turned to the teacher and said that this was not such a big amount and he could easily afford it. But the girl, indignant, said that with this money he could buy 3 of his favorite candies for Maine. So this was more important than giving them to the greedy driver. They argued for some time, but eventually the man agreed to the girl's amount and said that the young lady had won after all, and he was ready to take him for that amount. Daphne, smugly raising her head, said that he should have agreed from the very beginning and not wasted anyone's time. She turned to Johann and said that he agreed to take the man for the amount she named, so that he could safely go to the temple. The man was happy to hear this. He thanked the teacher for protecting 3 Maine candies and said that he would definitely buy them for her. But before he left, the man also asked where she was heading, because on his day off, he thought she would be resting. Daphne replied that she still had some things to take care of at the imperial palace, so that was where she was heading. To the girl's surprise, the man suddenly extended his hand and suggested that in that case they go there together. Smiling, he asked if she was against this. Daphne, of course, did not object, because it was only to her advantage. Soon they were sitting opposite each other in a carriage and heading towards the imperial palace. But Daphne did not get any pleasure from this trip. She never liked carriages. She had not liked them since her first reincarnation in this world. They were incredibly uncomfortable for her. The girl thought that perhaps it was because of the memories of how she was hit by a carriage in her previous life, but she still decided not to dwell on it too much. At this point, the trip seemed bearable to her, so Daphne decided to just enjoy the fact that she didn't have to walk the entire way. Well, then suddenly, Johann turned to the girl and noticed that she was thinking too much, and because of this, she was not happy. He asked if everything was okay with her. She smiled and immediately said that of course everything was fine with her, so he didn't have to worry. Johann still looked at her with caution and distrust for a while. He also noticed how tightly she clenched her hands into fists. I turned to the teacher and told her to inhale deeply for a few seconds and then exhale slowly for more seconds. As soon as she heard this, she was very shocked. Daphne did not understand why he asked her to do this, so she immediately asked about it. At that moment, Johann even took out a stopwatch and said that if she was feeling very seasick, she needed to try to calm down a little. He also explained that he would try to count the seconds for her so that she could focus on her breathing and suggested that she start trying it already. Daphne did just that. So for a while, she just inhaled and exhaled, and after a few minutes, the girl really felt how much easier it became for her. She immediately smiled, thanked the man, and said that she really felt better now, so he became her savior. The man put his watch back in his pocket and said that he was very happy that she had helped him. He explained that when his little sister Maylene was rocking him, he always helped her like that. The girl heard this and thought that Johann ended up being even more attentive than she thought. She didn't expect that he could even support her like that. She decided that as the captain of the knights, he should know the color better than anyone else, so she decided to start a conversation on this very topic. Smiling, yes. Who said that she heard the news that a new saint had been chosen? The man agreed and said that about several months had passed since then. The girl replied that she had heard it at about that time, and with a smile on her face, asked what kind of person this new saint was. How much exactly did Daphne try to kill her? The girl should have understood what the reason was, but she had to think it over so that he would not see in her a person who was planning to kill the saint. So she smiled and said that the new ruler was probably incredibly kind and beautiful. Johann himself began to smile. He said that she was really very kind and often smiled at everyone. This was an attractive feature of her personality. He also said that she was still quite romantic. At that moment, he suddenly looked away, and his thoughts were completely far from this carriage. Daphne immediately applauded. She said that everything was exactly as she thought. This girl is simply amazing. She also said that the work of the saint is incredibly difficult, and it was truly amazing. However, at that moment, the carriage suddenly ran over rocks. The cart began to shake from side to side. Daphne immediately stopped talking. She felt incredible fear and panic. Johann saw this and immediately turned to the teacher and asked if everything was okay with her, while the carriage continued to shake. The girl grabbed her stomach and started crying. She was very scared. Her whole body was shaking. Somewhere from afar, she heard Johann's voice calling her teacher. Soon he touched her cheek with his palm, and she finally paid attention to him. Johann worriedly asked, with his voice, if everything was okay with her. He was really very afraid for her. With a trembling voice, the girl asked him for forgiveness. She said that she was very sick in the carriage. Tears continued to flow down her cheeks, and her body was still shaking. At that moment, the carriage again ran over the big stone, and the cart began to shake from side to side. This made Daphne even more scared. She covered her face with her hands again and continued to tremble. The man immediately understood what was going on, so he took her by the shoulder and told her to take a deep breath. The girl immediately repeated after him. She tried to do everything to calm down. Johann smiled and said that everything had to be done correctly, that they needed to repeat what they had done. Earlier, he began to pronounce the words inhale and exhale so that she could regulate her breathing. Her hands were shaking, but she grabbed Johann's hand because it calmed her down a little. She knew that while he was nearby, nothing bad would happen. With her eyes closed, she breathed in. And as soon as the man saw her in this state, he couldn't look away. Something in him changed forever after this incident. Some time passed from that moment, and they finally passed that rocky road. So the carriage continued on along a flat, cleared area. Soon they finally arrived at the operator's palace. He stopped the carriage and told them to get out, because they had already arrived at the right place. Looking out the window, she could not believe her eyes. She was incredibly happy that the carriage had finally stopped. Then, with a trembling voice, she told the man that they had arrived at their destination. Then Daphne could not contain her happiness. She grabbed his hand again and, loudly screaming, thanked the man for what he did for her. After that, she ran out, rather bowed before him, and asked for forgiveness for her behavior. She said that she was very sorry because on her part such a thing was unacceptable. She said that she had made a big mistake and that it would never happen again. But the man reassured her and replied that she certainly didn't have to worry about it. Before leaving, he asked if it was true that she still had business at the operator's palace. Therefore, she probably needed to hurry. Johann smiled and said that he was very happy that she was okay so that she could leave. Daphne thanked him and also said that if his hand was hurt after she squeezed it, then she would really like him to tell her about it. The man laughed and replied that he would definitely tell her, and even take the debt with interest. At that moment, the carriage finally left, and the girl was about to head to the imperial palace. However, a man in uniform and glasses approached her. He looked very tired. The guy turned to Daphne and said that he was very happy that she had finally arrived. His name was Viscount Chopin, and he had come to help her conduct the examination. The girl said that she was very grateful to him for his hard work, even on weekends. It was really appreciated. The man was not used to being praised by anyone, so he said that there was nothing wrong with it at all, because she also works hard, so they both deserved praise. Then they went towards the palace and gave us. I asked if they could first take a look at the children's recreation area. This was the most important thing. The man, of course, did not object. He led her to the right place, and as soon as they arrived, he also told her that this place adjoined a garden in which there were no high steps or sharp decorations. Chopin explained that it was perfect for children, so she didn't have to worry. When Daphne saw this place, she was really delighted. She said that they just needed to remove a few stones, and then everything would be perfect. In the meantime, they went further. The man also said that inside there was a greenhouse. There were many rare plants. It would be ideal for educational purposes. The girl thanked him for this valuable information and said that it was all just wonderful, and also asked if she could look around already, but more slowly. The man smiled and said that of course she could do it. His task was only to take her to this place. After this, he also asked her to take a special pass and look around as she wished. while he, in the meantime, would go on to carry out his duties. Daphne was very surprised to hear this, because she thought that he had already completed his part of the work and would go to rest. However, he still had a lot of other work, so she sympathized with him. Clearly, she took a special sheet of paper on which various places in this area were written out, and was surprised that there was a separate palace there. In special papers, she read that it was often used for social events, which meant that the pass allowed her to walk only in the place adjacent to it. She walked around this area further and noticed a fountain that was nearby. It could be very dangerous, so she should definitely keep the children away from it. However, she did not know what to do, because on the other hand, they might really like him if they saw how he worked. Daphne decided to return to this issue a little later. When she went further, she suddenly heard a familiar voice that addressed her by name. The girl was a little surprised. She did not expect that someone would know her here. As soon as she turned her head to the side, she saw a familiar face. It was her ex-fiancé, Hardy's. The man looked at the girl, and he looked really stern. Because of this, Daphne became wary. She didn't know what to do in such a situation. But at that very moment, Johann, who went to the temple, was in the dark dungeon of this place, and there with him was a man held hostage. The poor guy was tied up and tortured for quite a long time before that. The man also beat him several times and asked where the saint was. The man asked for mercy. However, he then said that the saint had left, and so he could not see her. Johann looked at him with a look filled with disgust, and said that he had no doubt that she had gone to write another novel. Then he, asking himself, thought about what he should do with this guy now. The man looked at Johann again and said that he really didn't know anything, so he begged to be left alive and just let go. However, the man sighed heavily and turned to the knights who stood on the other side and asked them to remove him from this place and get rid of him as they wished. The guy immediately started screaming loudly. He asked to be spared. However, it was all useless because soon his throat was cut, and Johann thoughtfully replied that every day he saw only such garbage. It already tired him out. But for some reason, this feeling seemed very strange to him, and he felt strange immediately after that meeting with Daphne, which changed something in him. The girl at the same time was in the imperial palace. Seeing her ex-boyfriend, she panicked, but understood that she needed to calm down as soon as possible. Hardiness spoke first, smiling and asking what kind of expression she had on her face. The man even found it hard to believe that it was really her. He certainly didn't expect to see her in this place. But the girl herself, seeing his tired appearance and large bags under his eyes, realized that the rumors that they wanted to know about the Marquis's house being in trouble turned out to be true. So she thought that this person certainly could not be afraid of the girl, said that it was her. So she asked him to remove the idiotic expression from his face. Hardnitz came closer to her and asked why she decided that she had the right to insult her. But he did not wait for an answer to this question and said that the most important thing for him was to find out what she herself was doing in this place. He asked if the girl understood, or at least how much effort he spent on searching for her over these several years. But she did not allow him to even come close to her. He was so unpleasant to her that even looking at him was already a great difficulty. Of course, this made him very angry. He asked how she could behave so carefree after she ran away from home without saying a word to anyone. But seeing her in different expression, he said that it didn't matter. He suggested that she go home and beg the Count for forgiveness, because then perhaps he would take pity on her. Daphne tried to calm down. She decided that she needed to count to 3 and run away, look into the eyes of this idiot, and calculate his moves in advance. She understood perfectly well that he was already planning something evil, so she had to be ready for anything. While her ex-fiancé continued to yell at her, the girl began to count in her head to the number 2. She simply turned around. The man, of course, saw this and asked where she was going, but Daphne did not listen to him. She was already about to run away when suddenly another very familiar person appeared in front of her, and it turned out to be none other than her sister Lily. This girl was dressed all in white. She had a gold chain and a surprised look. Lilia, recognizing her half-sister, smiled and said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. She asked how the girl was doing in general and where she had been all this time. Daphne agreed with her and said that they really hadn't seen each other for a long time. But when the girl wanted to say something else to Lily, She suddenly ignored her, and seeing Hardness said that she was glad to finally find him. Daphne was genuinely amazed that the girl had just not paid attention to her, despite the fact that for so many years they had never seen each other or even communicated. But Lilia turned to the man and said that she had to go through so many problems to get out of the temple and see him. But she was very offended by the fact that he just left without even saying a single word to her. This hurt her. As soon as Daphne heard about the temple, she was very surprised. She then looked closely at her half-sister and noticed her unusual clothes, and also the cross. She didn't understand why the girl suddenly decided to voluntarily wear clothes from the temple, so she became even more wary. But in the end, Lillian herself explained everything. She said that she had been so busy during the saint's purification period that she had missed the man very much. After all, they had not seen each other all this time. Then Daphne understood what the period of purification of the saint was about. After all, that was the name of the period of adaptation for a new saint. Then the girl guessed that Lillian was the new saint, and this really amazed her. Her sister meanwhile turned around and saw that Daphne was still standing there, and said that she probably didn't know the news yet. She came closer to her and said that she had been chosen as the new saint. It was a great honor for her, so she was very happy. Daphne didn't know how she was supposed to react to this, so she simply said that she understood everything and also congratulated her on it. The girl herself thought about the fact that since Lillian became a saint, this means that in the original, her character tried to kill her half-sister. At that moment, her head was a complete mess. She decided that she needed to get her thoughts in order as soon as possible, because that way she wouldn't be able to sort anything out normally. However, here Hardness suddenly pushed Lillian aside. He walked up to his ex-fiancée and grabbed her by the shoulders. He raised his voice at her again and asked if the girl even understood how many problems had fallen on him after she disappeared without a trace. Of course, Daphne didn't like all this. She looked at him with disgust and asked him to move away and not touch her. But the man did not listen to her. He continued to shout and talk about his own. The guy asked the girl if it seemed to her that she was behaving completely recklessly and selfishly. The girl was very outraged by his behavior. She said that it was harassment and asked if he really wanted to go to the court of aristocrats and explain everything there. The man suddenly smiled and asked about some kind of riches, she said. After all, he was her fiancé. He asked Daphne if she really thought that all this would work. However, at that moment, another man approached them. He grabbed Harbus by the hand and said that he would not succeed, especially since they had parted, they were no longer a bride and groom. The man turned out to be His Highness Norris. He turned to the Marquise and said that he looked full of energy even after sleeping in the world of aristocrats. He was very surprised that the man decided to demonstrate his strength in this way. For him, it was very surprising and even incomprehensible. Hardness was really in a lot of pain because the man was squeezing his hand. He turned to the emperor and asked what he was doing here in this place, because he had to stay at his meeting. Norris explained that, despite the fact that at this time the saint must be busy, apparently they have a lot of free time, he asked. Is it really a complete mess in the temple, since they allowed themselves such things? Lilia, in her defense, asked for forgiveness and said that she was really sorry that they had been so rude, and she also added that something like that would not happen again. She explained that they only did this because they saw their precious sister, so they decided to come up and say hello. After all, they hadn't seen each other for so many years. As soon as Doris heard that they called her precious, he was very surprised. But then smiling, he suddenly said that she was actually very valuable to him. Having heard all this for a long time, she was very amazed. She did not understand at all what he was talking about. She did not expect that this guardian could appreciate her. In fact, this was the worst-case scenario for a kindergarten teacher. So the girl didn't know what to do in this case. Nothing like this had ever happened to her before. The emperor finally let go of Daphne's ex-fiancé's hand and said that in order to just see her, he had to beg her and run around like crazy. Hardys yelled at him and said that he needed to resolve all his affairs with Daphne first. He said that he would take her with him in order to discuss everything in a calm atmosphere. However, Norris was not going to let him do that. He said that since it was really that important, then he could make his position loud and clear right there and then. The man was a little surprised. but he understood that he had to do it. So in a voice trembling with fear, he said that Daphne had been his from the very beginning. Hearing this, he was very surprised. He said that his voice was so quiet that he did not hear anything at all. So he looked at him with a very stern look and asked the guy to repeat everything he said. Hardness again began to repeat the same phrase with a trembling voice. However, seeing his even more angry look, he decided not to say this. He curled up into a ball on the floor and said that it was all unimportant. The emperor smiled contentedly and said that he was very glad that in the end everything was all right. After this, Norris added that in that case it was time for them to go, because they had an important preliminary agreement. As soon as Daphne heard about this, she was very shocked because no one warned her about this. Norris said that of course it was, so she promised that they would do it together. The girl did not understand at all what he was talking about because she had not promised anything to anyone. However, then she suddenly remembered that he meant for sure. A visit to the house, the man, seeing her surprised expression, asked if she had completely forgotten about it. He said that he was very hurt because of it, but Daphne suddenly replied that it was really time for her to go back, so she couldn't stay in this place for long. Norris thoughtfully said that he did not understand why she suddenly decided to leave. He said that the sun was still high and shining brightly, and she had already said that she needed to run. This amazed him. Daphne couldn't believe that he was actually hinting to her to waste even more of her precious weekend daylight and stay there with him. The man looked at her with a sad look and again asked if she really needed to go that badly. She had long understood that if she refused now, she would definitely be in trouble. So she laughed nervously and said that of course it wasn't so. She was sincerely glad that she could keep her promise, so she would stay. The man said that judging by her laughter, she was really sincere, so he was grateful to her for changing her mind and deciding to stay. Daphne laughed again and said that of course it was all just like that. At that moment, her ex-fiancé stood up and watched her behavior with suspicion. Then Hardness could no longer stand such behavior. He said that if she continued to behave like this, then he would have no choice but to tell the Count everything about it. Daphne, of course, was not afraid of this. She folded her hands on her hips and told him to do it. He could calmly tell his father about it. She was not at all against it. As soon as the man heard this confidence, he was sincerely amazed. He did not expect at all that she would even tell him to do it himself. Well, Daphne repeated her offer. She told him to run and complain to his father. She also asked if he really thought that she would help save his drowning body. The ex-fiancé was already indignant again. He wanted to say something, but he didn't have time because the girl turned around and, turning to the operator, thanked him for all of this. Then they calmly began to leave, but Hardness suddenly hid behind Lily's shoulders and again asked where they were heading anyway. Daphne, seeing her sister, immediately remembered that she wanted to tell her something too. She congratulated the girl on becoming a saint and said it seriously. She also gave her blessing to Hardness. She believed that, from his appearance, he needed it much more. Lillian laughed and agreed with her sister and thanked her for the congratulations. The girl looked completely calm and was not at all bothered by this situation. Norris, who was a little cold, said that it was too cold outside that day, so he suggested that she go to the greenhouse. The girls who had such a temperature were quite normal, were very surprised. She said that His Highness turns out to be much more sensitive than everyone says about him. After they moved away, Lily suddenly kicked the ground very hard. She thought about her sister and was very angry with her. She could believe that the girl really thought that she could behave like that with her and get away with it, and that she would come out of this situation completely innocent. After some time, the man and Daphne finally came to the greenhouse. He sat her down at a small table where there was already a cup of hot tea and asked if she liked this place. Daphne smiled and said that it really was. It was very beautiful, and she felt comfortable. The man, sitting down opposite her, said that some say that if lovers come to this place, their love will last forever. This made the girl very wary, but she didn't show it and only laughed and said that this was a very interesting fact. After that, she quickly changed the subject of the conversation. She thanked His Highness for helping her. Then Norris asked if it was true that she felt very uncomfortable when instead of an excursion, they suddenly decided to change. Daphne said that of course it was so. She even had to work overtime, but she didn't really have a choice, so she couldn't complain. The man smiled and said that he was truly grateful that she had agreed so willingly and taken it so easily. For him, this was truly important. At that moment, Daphne thought that, since he wanted to say it from the very beginning, it wasn't even worth asking. It was extremely uncomfortable for her to be around this man. She didn't understand his intentions. The girl ordered. Of course, she agreed. And despite the fact that she could not sleep or eat and only worked all the time, it did not matter. She explained that it was a great honor to exhaust her weak, pathetic body. The man immediately suspected that something was wrong there, and she spoke in a very strange way to these words. For a while he looked at her with a serious gaze, and then suddenly smiling, said that he still couldn't understand whether she was really fearless or just too confident in herself. Daphne didn't respond to this. She didn't know what could be said to that, so she simply looked away from him and remained silent. The man meanwhile stood up from his seat and said that she really should watch her courage, because one day it could play a bad joke on her. Daphne changed the subject again and asked if there was any other reason why he insisted on a tour of the imperial palace. The man sat back and replied that of course there was a reason and he was going to tell her about it. Norris, without taking his eyes off her, said that it was indeed a very important reason, and it was that several years ago, around this time, Maxion was almost killed. The carriage in which he was riding passed through the Aquilian Lake Park. As soon as Daphne heard about this, she immediately became wary. She remembered that it was in this lake park that they wanted to conduct the initial excursion. Norris asked what she thought about it now, and he suggested that perhaps he had even had a real seizure. The girl thought about the fact that a few years ago Maxion was only 3 years old. Even this made her very angry. Therefore, it was difficult for her to imagine how much stronger his emotions were. Norris said that if she wanted, she could consider it selfish to suddenly change the excursion location without even warning. However, he couldn't do otherwise. The man said that at least he could give her a chance to hit him if she was really very angry. He pointed to his cheek and said that was where she could hit. If she wanted to, but she seriously thought about this proposal. She did not understand why he even brought it up. But the girl actually wouldn't mind hitting someone, so she asked whether she should hit with her palm or her fist. Norris didn't expect her to agree to this. He just looked at her with a distant gaze for a while. After this, the man suddenly laughed, his whole body shaking because it was really funny to him. But Daphne replied that she was quite serious when she asked him about it. The man did not react to her words in any way. Then, sighing heavily, she said that she would forget about it because she was a pacifist. Instead, she would just like to learn more about Maxion. The man, who had continued to laugh throughout the whole scene, finally calmed down and said that, of course, there was no problem for her to find out a little more about him. Daphne was very surprised that this situation made him so upset that he even started crying. But Norris quickly calmed down. He explained to the girl that many aristocrats looked at Maxion with approval, because in the place of the prince was not the son of the emperor, but his younger brother. The girl said for aristocrats who are eager to get the throne, the symbol of power is like an uninvited guest. Norris smiled smugly and said that this was exactly what he expected from a first-class teacher. She hit the nail on the head. Daphne sighed heavily and said that it was probably very difficult for both him and Maxion to go through these times. The emperor then asked what she was thinking now. Did she really feel even a little sympathy for him after she learned about this whole situation? The girl replied that she only felt sympathy for those who were weak and sweet by nature. So she doubted that she could experience similar feelings for him. Norris took it as a joke, so he laughed again. After that, he asked her not to treat him too frivolously under any circumstances. He could still surprise her. He said that for an emperor who is eavesdropped on by rats day and night, a small corner in the meeting room would be enough. Daphne didn't understand why he said that, so she asked what he wanted to do in the meeting room, and in a small corner at that. The man said that of course he would be there worrying about the future empires and the stability of people, or perhaps he would think about the peace of those rats. The girl thought about the fact that talking about rats and the like is a rather gloomy topic for a kindergarten, so she is not used to even keeping such things in her head. Then Daphne smiled and said that if he came to her, she would at least pour him a cup of tea, provided that he had permission from the director. The man then smiled smugly and said that he would never forget her words, and that was indeed true. Several days passed since then, and now Daphne, having finally returned to school, was getting the children ready for this excursion to the imperial palace. She told all her students that they should not run away under any circumstances, but explore one after another. Now they will go to the greenhouse, so they should listen carefully and not play around. As soon as the children heard about this, they immediately became very happy. They applauded and started shouting. Even though they only visited the first place, Daphne was already tired. This excursion was supposed to be very long. She had to check all the time to make sure no one had fallen behind or dropped anything. Her eyes hurt from how long she squinted. When, before entering the greenhouse, she told them to line up in 2 even rows and go inside, the children immediately split up and then went into the imperial greenhouse. As soon as they saw its size and the beauty that was inside, they were very amazed. It really was a beautiful sight. There were very large and beautiful flowers around, and not far from the fountain, there were even butterflies of an unusual breed. She turned to the children a long time ago and asked if they weren't wonderful and amazing and also unique for her sake. She asked what they should do with these little friends around them. In one voice, the children immediately answered that they should in no case harm them, but simply look with their eyes. The girl said that everything is correct. Flowers say, "Oi," when you touch them. Daphne thought that if the children behaved as well and quietly as they responded, it would be much easier for her to do such excursions more often. And it was hard for her, for example, because Pavel's raspberries were in the mud while she was running around everywhere, and Maxion fell into the pond during a fight with Maylene, and Banteite ate chocolate until his mouth turned black, and eventually he ate too much of it and even started to get a stomach ache. The girl believed that even 1,000 hands and eyes would not be enough to keep an eye on all these children and calm them down, as well as make sure that they do not get into trouble. In the end, she told Mylan to change into spare clothes and Maxon to dry himself with a fluffy towel so as not to get sick. And she gave Bodiet a towel and told him to wipe his mouth well and not to eat chocolate anymore. Otherwise, he would feel sick again. Some time passed since then, and the girl finally sat down to rest near the fountain because it was lunchtime. Daphne thought that as soon as she finished watching the children's lunch, she would need to eat something herself because she hadn't eaten anything at all since breakfast and was already hungry. But at that moment, Maximon suddenly approached her. He turned to the teacher, and it was clear that he was very worried. The girl immediately asked what was wrong and why he didn't eat with the other children. But the guy explained that Maylin had disappeared somewhere. She was nowhere to be found. Daphne, hearing about this, was very surprised. She immediately began to worry and asked what he meant. The boy explained that she said she wanted to get water from her bag. However, she still hadn't returned, and because of this, he began to worry a little. It was strange and not like her. He explained that he had already searched the entire surrounding area. However, he could not find her anywhere. Daphne was horrified by the information she heard. The girl understood that she had to act quickly. She ran outside the greenhouse and saw Viscount Chopin passing nearby. She saw the man and immediately called him to her. The guy recognized the teacher, Duffwell. He was surprised if the excursion wasn't on that day, and why was she without children if that was the case? The girl explained to the Viscount that he had to help her ask the Imperial Knights. They had to act very quickly. The man saw that she was very worried about this and was surprised. He immediately asked in an alarmed voice what had happened to her and why she needed knights. But Daphne replied that their child was missing, so they had to get all the help they could to find her. Chopin understood how serious the situation was, so she said that she would immediately call the knights, and they would begin the search. And Daphne continued to run around the estate. She shouted Malin's name and tried to find her. She screamed loudly and told the girl to answer if she heard her. She said that it was the teacher, and they urgently needed to find her. Daphne had absolutely no idea where she could have disappeared to in such a short time. There could even be dangerous plants in the greenhouse, so she was even more worried. At that moment, approaching a small lake, she suddenly saw a shoe floating in it. The girl immediately ran closer. She recognized this shoe. It belonged to Malene. Because of this, Daphne worried even more. She most of all did not want all this to be connected with water. The girl immediately climbed into this lake. she continued to shout Malin's name and tried to find her. And when she plunged into the water once again, she suddenly heard someone's voice behind her, telling Daphne to stop already. The girl didn't even have time to understand who it was, because someone grabbed her by the waist and began to pull her out of this lake. This person turned out to be Johan. The man put her on the ground, but for a long time she did not notice who it was. She continued to scream and talked about letting her go, because there was Malin. She had to save her. The man then turned her head towards him and told her to calm down for good. Then Daphne finally looked at him and realized that it was Malin's guardian. She said in a trembling voice that she thought his sister had fallen into the water and that they should hurry and save her. But the man shouted at her again and told her to take a closer look at that place and finally calm down. The girl turned her head to the side and saw that the shoe that she thought belonged to Malin turned out to be just a leaf from a tree that was floating in the lake. Johan confirmed this information and said that it was just a leaf. She shouldn't worry. Daphne couldn't believe it. She continued to stand in his arms, but didn't know what to do next. She thought that it seemed as if all the problems that surrounded her were not enough for her. She also began to completely lose her mind. This made her incredibly angry. She didn't even check anything properly, and ended up just running into the water and starting to panic like a crazy girl. Daphne could not bear this shame. She fell to the ground and in a trembling voice told the man that she was very sorry that all this had happened. She also said that she should have been more attentive. She added that she would take responsibility for Malin's safe return, so she would definitely make every effort to find her. The man calmed her down. He smiled and told her to stop worrying, and also suggested that they look for his little sister together. He said that he knew it might sound impolite, but just now she looked like a child who had been left alone by the water, so he wanted to help her search. Daphne thought about it for a while, and then said that she had entrusted him with the work about herself, so she hoped that he would still help her to actually do it. And the girl herself thought that even now, when he had to go, he was more excited than anyone else. He was incredibly calm, and because of this, she felt even more awkward. Daphne knew that she also had to come to her senses because she didn't have time to worry. She had to focus on finding the child. At that moment, the girl suddenly felt some unpleasant smell behind her, and she did not have time to say anything to the man when suddenly a huge plant grabbed her in its tentacles. This plant lifted the girl into the air. The thorns wrapped around her neck. She could suffocate and die at any moment. Luckily, Johan managed to react in time. He took out his sword and cut the plant and saved the girl. The man said that this is exactly why he doesn't like the Imperial Palace. This place can be too dangerous even for an adult, not to mention children. He said that this place is full of various bugs that are unnatural and can cause harm. They continued their search after they calmed down, and finally, in the far corner of the greenhouse, they found Maine sitting on one of these plants. The girl, seeing her teacher, immediately waved happily and said that she was having a lot of fun. She also added that she would like to return to this place someday. It was magnificent. Daphne, seeing her, panicked a lot, but Johan stepped forward and told her not to be afraid. Everything was fine. He would immediately deal with this plant and save the girl. But the teacher stopped him. She said that this plant is a colphid. It was a parasite and feeds on divine power. The man, hearing about this, was very surprised. He had never seen a plant that could feed on divine power. But Daphne explained that this was very serious, because the stronger the divine power, the worse the compatibility, which is why it was so easy to lure Malin to itself. In fact, in the original, it was said that it appeared only in the middle of the plot. The girl would never have thought that she would try to kidnap Malin right now. In an alarmed voice, she told the man that it uses people's weakness to bewitch them, and a person who possesses powerful divine power, like a man, is even more vulnerable. Therefore, he should not have even come closer to him under any circumstances. Daphne said that the chance of him being bewitched was even higher than the chance of being sad, so he should have taken care of himself. The man was genuinely shocked to hear all this, and for some time he thought about what he should have done. But in the end, he still disobeyed the teacher. The guy was going to save his sister, so he wasn't going to stop. He took his sword in his hands and started chopping up those plant tentacles. During a break between battles, Johan said that if he was ultimately defeated in disgrace, he would like to know if she would really run away. Seeing her surprised expression, he told her not to watch. This sight would definitely not be pleasant, so she had better watch out. The girl tried to stop him. She told him not to go there, and that it would be better if they calmly came up with another plan. But Johann had a different opinion. He went on the attack again, and eventually his entire beautiful form began to be splashed with liquid that flowed from this terrible, deadly plant. Malin grabbed one of the tentacles and told it to lift her even higher. She was incredibly scared. But when the man finally saw her, he ran up and defeated the plant that controlled the girl. With the last of its strength, it threw her up. Of course, Malin was happy. She said that she flew so high in the sky like a bird, but Daphne understood that it was very dangerous because she was not flying. On the contrary, she was falling to the ground, and if she was not saved somehow, she could crash or simply get seriously injured. And at that moment, before she had time to think, her body itself began to move there. Daphne managed to jump in time. She activated a power that she had never felt before. This power filled her as naturally as a child's first steps, and ultimately, she saved Malin from falling. With a trembling voice, she turned to the girl and asked if everything was okay with her. She was really very afraid for her life. Malin immediately said that of course everything was fine with her. She wasn't even scared, but continued to hug the teacher because she loved her very much. Then Daphne finally realized that she had no doubts that she still had her family's talent, and somehow she was able to activate it now. The girl turned to the teacher and said that she was with her mother and was flying in the sky. It was a wonderful feeling for her. Daphne didn't even have time to answer her because due to severe stress, she fell asleep very quickly. The girl realized that the effect of the divine power had ended, and now she had to gain strength and energy. She hugged her and calmed her down. At that moment, she heard Johann's voice behind her, asking the teacher if everything was okay with her. But as soon as she turned around, he saw tears streaming down her cheeks. She held back her sobs, only so as not to wake up Malin. She immediately felt awkward about her feelings, turned away from the man, and asked for forgiveness. She said that the tension had subsided, and for this reason, other emotions filled her. She said that on her part, of course, it was very stupid. At that moment, she laughed and, wiping away her tears, said that it was as if she had done something special, although this was not the case. Johann didn't understand why she started crying. He wanted to put his hand on her shoulder and calm her down. However, he changed his mind. He understood that it would be wrong. Daphne eventually sat down on the ground because the girl was too heavy, and the man said he wanted to examine her arm because he thought she had hurt it. She didn't give him her hand. The girl said that everything was fine. She was more worried about him than about herself because he was in the epicenter of the battle itself. Johann smiled, waved his hand, and said that he was definitely fine, so she didn't have to worry. At that moment, he suddenly lifted his shirt and pointed to his lower abdomen. He said that he once received a deep wound from a sword, but was able to heal himself and therefore easily survived. He pulled his shirt back down and said that if his treatment was bad, she might hit him. That's why Johann insistently asked her to show her wound. In the meantime, he would support Malin, because health is no joke. In the end, the girl agreed. She handed the girl over to him and showed him her stricken hand, where a rather severe bruise was visible. The man immediately directed his healing abilities to her hand, and gradually it became smaller and smaller. While the man was treating her, he was amazed. He noticed how she covered a huge distance with just one jump to catch Malin. Johann assumed that most likely this was the very talent of her family. However, he did not tell her anything because he was afraid that she would not want to open up to him, but would only close herself off even more. After some time, the girl examined her hand and said that it had healed very well early on, so there was no need to hit him. At that moment, the high priest of Hauesdasit suddenly ran into their greenhouse. He started shouting his daughter's name loudly. He was very worried as soon as he found out what happened, so the first thing he did was run to her. Seeing that she was safe, he was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. Malin immediately became happy when she heard her father's voice. She waved her hand at him and said that she missed him very much. Johann handed his little sister to his father and said that Malin was completely fine, so he didn't have to worry now. She wasn't even hurt anywhere. He asked him not to stand on his knees in all this chaos, but to finally be able to come to his senses and remember who he is. The man did just that. He looked at his daughter and said that she was a real naughty girl. He asked if her dad hadn't told her not to leave the teacher's side even a step, because it could be very dangerous. But the girl smiled and said that her dad shouldn't scold her, because her mom had called her, and she went to her. The man, hearing about this, was very shocked. He asked, "How is this possible?" And the daughter answered that her mother called her to eat cookies. They even drank. Together, Mylene was very happy, so she hoped that her father would not scold her even more. The father hugged his daughter again. He was really happy that she was okay, and even shed a tear because of his strong emotions. Johann, seeing this, told the teacher that this time everything also happened at the lake when his mother died, and because of this, it was even more painful. He said that he couldn't do anything then, but only watched as his mother died. It happened very slowly, and because of this, it was still painful for the boy to remember it. When Daphne heard this, it now became clear to her what had happened and why the man had been so scared when she had climbed into the water. She immediately felt embarrassed that she had given Johann all these unpleasant memories of her actions. She decided that she would definitely have to apologize to him again. Meiling's father said that in fact those people in the palace were completely incompetent. He was shocked that they allowed a monster like the Kelfid to pass through the palace walls. It was very ignorant of them. Daphne thought that, in fact, the father and son were very similar. They both quickly lost their composure, so it was immediately clear that they were related. The man sighed heavily and said that he had to request a personal audience with His Majesty in order to talk to him about all of this, since he was not at all happy with this situation. At that moment, the man suddenly activated his magical abilities and lifted Daphne up. He said that he had to tell His Majesty everything and say that only thanks to the teacher this child was not harmed. After he put the girl back on the ground, she felt that all her clothes and hair instantly dried out. This really surprised her. Daphne had never experienced divine power before and thought that it was simply amazing, for which she was incredibly grateful to the man, because she definitely did not want to freeze. The man also asked the girl for forgiveness for not introducing himself a little earlier. It was wrong on his part, so he then gave his name and said that he was Mylene's father. Daphne bowed and told Kavus that she was very glad to meet him. She also introduced herself and said that she was the girl's teacher. She also said that she was very sorry that such a situation happened, but the man waved his hand and replied that she should not blame herself at all. It was definitely not her responsibility. Continuing to hug his daughter, he said that no one could prevent the attraction from the Kelfid. Besides, they were the ones who owed her. After all, she saved his daughter. The man also said that from now on, if it concerns the London kindergarten or Daphne's teacher personally, he will definitely support her in everything, and perhaps even allocate additional funds for their well-being. The girl was very surprised to hear this. She already wanted to say something about the confidentiality that he saw, but Johann stopped her. He put his hand on the girl's shoulder and gestured for her not to say anything. Daphne immediately fell silent. She thought that, in that case, what she had read in the second part of the novel about the saint was true, and she believed that in that case they could even help her with it. At that moment, she suddenly began to smile, and as soon as Johann noticed this smile, he immediately asked why she was so happy. The girl answered that nothing like that. She just remembered one moment, and that's why she smiled. But in fact, it was the heroine's onion smile that should not be shown to anyone. In the end, the man turned around and said that he would take his baby and went home with her. He felt that there was no longer any need to continue this excursion. Daphne did not object and wished them a safe journey back. Johann also began to leave, saying that he also needed to do some things. If she suddenly felt even the slightest discomfort, he really wanted her to immediately go to the hospital. Daphne bowed again to the man and thanked him for what he had done that day. She said that it was very valuable to her. He left, and Daphne was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief that it was all over. And she felt that she needed to return to the children as soon as possible. As soon as the girl was about to go forward, she suddenly heard a man's voice behind her, who addressed her by her old name. The girl had absolutely no idea who it could be, but as soon as she turned her head and saw this man, of course she was not happy, because this man was her brother. The guy told Daphne that Marquis Vilchen had actually seen her, and he asked how the girl even dared to appear in this place. Daphne just sighed heavily and said that she hadn't seen her brother for a long time. She was struck by his disrespect, but she decided to clarify some things with him from the very beginning. The girl said that she had been here all this time, and it was not she who suddenly appeared in this place, but rather he. The man began to approach her closer and said that she had become more arrogant since their last meeting. This amazed him, but she was no longer afraid of him, so with a voice filled with confidence, the girl asked if he was really going to hit her again. The guy came closer to her, grabbed her by the collar, and asked if she had really gone completely crazy. Daphne was already absolutely ready for them to start beating her. However, they were suddenly interrupted by Johann, who returned and pointed a sword at her brother. With a smile on his face, he told the guy that there were too many pests in this greenhouse. As soon as the guy saw Mr. Johann, he was very shocked. He asked in a voice trembling with fear what brought the man to this place. However, he realized that he had seen and heard everything. Therefore, he was about to explain that everything he saw was not true, but Johann did not listen to him. He smiled and said that he came to deal with the pests. Then he pointed his gaze towards the sword that was pointed at his hand and said that most likely there was a pest sitting there, so he asked the man to let him deal with this creature. The guy, hearing this, immediately became very scared, and in the end he let go of Daphne and fell to the ground, replying that there was no need for this at all. Johann then calmly smiled and asked the teacher if she had already left. The girl replied that she had to accompany the children the rest of the way, so she really had to run already. The man then smiled happily and asked her to allow him to walk her home in that case, since there could still be many dangers on the way back. He extended his hand to the girl. Daphne did not object. She said that she would gladly accept his invitation. In fact, she thought that it would only be better this way. From that moment on, everything went well. Even several days have passed, and before going to work, we walked around the market. She had special preparations, and she was constantly racking her brains over what could replace the felt paper. The girl was standing in front of one of the counters and trying to figure out what would be best for her to take when she suddenly heard that someone was arguing on the next street. The man got angry at the other man and told him to stop lying and just leave. Daphne immediately became interested in what was going on there, and as soon as she turned her head to the side, she saw that Duke Kadan was involved in the quarrel. The girl did not understand what he was doing in this place. However, she still could not hear their conversation due to the fact that there was quite a large distance between them. When she came closer, she heard that the man who came out of his establishment said that he was already tired of repeating, "Their shop had no problems, and they are not engaged in the slave trade." As soon as Daphne heard about the slave trade, she was very shocked. But then Kaiden spoke up. The man said he just came to buy a gift for his wife. Maybe he just needed to have his deaf ears torn out. In the end, the seller said that if he came with his wife, then perhaps he would believe him. However, until that happens, he definitely won't even let him in. But then suddenly, he saw Daphne approach the man from behind and asked if this girl was really his wife. The girl immediately realized that she had been caught eavesdropping, so she urgently needed to come up with some kind of excuse that would even sound plausible. She came closer to the man again and greeted him, already wanting to think of something, but didn't have time. And all because Kaiden managed to react in time. He smiled, hugged the girl, and told the seller that she was indeed his wife. He even hugged the girl for credibility. But the seller didn't believe him right away. He told him not to lie. The husband was dressed pretentiously and formally, but seeing his wife in a shabby dress was completely illogical next to him. Daphne panicked at that moment, because even though she felt very uncomfortable about it, the man was still right when he said it. She looked at the Duke and noticed that he didn't even have anything to answer to this, which made the girl even more embarrassed. Just when she wanted to say something, Kaiden suddenly pressed her to himself again and said that the man not only brazenly looked at someone else's wife, but even dared to brazenly wag his terrible tongue. He turned to Daphne and, sighing heavily, told the girl that he was very upset about this, and, for the sake of credibility, called her his darling. The girl was very surprised. However, the man asked if she remembered that their father had bought these clothes especially for her, and that they were incredibly dear to her as a memory. Daphne immediately understood that he decided to get out of the situation in this way. So she smiled and said that this was indeed the case, that her father had actually bought her this dress. She said that he had dragged out his sick body just to buy it, so it was really very precious to him, despite the fact that it didn't look too expensive and also elegant. When the seller heard all this, he immediately asked for forgiveness. He said that he didn't mean it at all, and that he was very sorry that he misunderstood them. Well then, suddenly, Kaiden turned to his grandfather again and asked if she thought it was necessary to shoot him simply for what he had done. Daphne understood that if he said this, he could actually make it happen, so she told him not to go to such extremes. Then suddenly, another worker came out to him on the street. He shouted at this seller and asked why he was standing there and doing nothing. He needed to run quickly because a search was about to begin here. As soon as the man heard this, he was very shocked and realized that they had been caught after all, so they really needed to run away immediately. He stopped paying attention to the guests present and even pushed them while the guy was running past. He was really worried only about himself at that moment. Kaiden, who saw this, sighed heavily and said that they would probably have to move their shelter again. After that, he looked at the teacher and asked if everything was okay with her, because he was a little worried that maybe something was wrong. But the girl replied that she was fine and asked for forgiveness for getting too carried away while watching, and it might have seemed to him that she was injured. Then she asked the man if they were really engaged in the slave trade. Kaiden replied that he could not say for sure. However, they saw an open door and they wanted to go in and check everything out. Daphne immediately said in a quiet voice that if this matter was confidential or something like that, then she was very good at keeping secrets and was ready to just stand and listen. The man said that usually, when it comes to privacy, people pretend that they didn't see anything. But she turned out to be completely different, and this pleasantly surprised him. In the end, Kaiden said that everything was exactly as she heard. Recently, some Taina began to trade people. The girl was incredibly amazed. She said that she could not believe that such crazy people still existed. But the men replied that it didn't end there. Some say that they used Mayan stones as currency. Daphne was amazed when she heard about these stones. She asked if he really meant the same material from the duchy that was used in magical engineering. He said that now it seemed like a secret that was worth keeping a secret, because it turned out to be true. He said before word gets out that I'm sponsoring the slave trade, don't you think it would be better to wipe them off the face of the earth? Daphne thought about it and said that indeed, if minerals from the Duchy of Hildeborn were used in something like this, then it could indeed be very dangerous. But when the girl heard the phrase, wipe off the face of the earth, she was shocked. She asked what he meant by that. She was afraid that he might resort to too harsh methods. But Kaiden suddenly smiled. Then she realized that all her fears were not in vain. He really could easily do something like that. Daphne sighed heavily and said that this was clearly beyond her understanding, so she was not going to develop this topic further. Then the man smiled again and said that he had only asked her a question, so she was not at all obliged to think about all the bad things that exist in this world. In the end, the girl said that if you think about it like that, then he was right. After that, she got nervous and said that curiosity would definitely destroy her sooner or later. For some time, Kaiden looked at the girl. At that very moment, she was looking somewhere to the side. Then a completely imperceptible but sweet smile suddenly appeared on his face. He told the girl that she turned out to be quite funny. Daphne did not hear what he said. Therefore, she asked the man to repeat it. At that moment, she thought about it, and a strong wind blew. But the man was not going to repeat this, so he simply smiled and said that he had not said anything like that, and she could simply ignore it. That day, they also had another excursion, and the road to the garden turned out to be much noisier than usual, which tired Daphne even more. While the parents were saying goodbye to their children and giving them their last money at the bus stop, the girl watched to make sure no one fought and everyone was collected. Suddenly, looking to the side, she saw that the emperor had driven up to their group with his brother. She was very surprised because she didn't think that a man could have so much free time. He told Maxion that he absolutely had to get something and it had to happen at any cost. Then Daphne turned to the parents and students and told them to start entering, but that it should be done in an organized and decent manner. the girl was a little worried. However, she believed that since this was a long-awaited day, if the guardians did not worry and were too nervous, then she was sure that everything would work out for them. As soon as they got inside, the girl said that they now had to start casting roles for the first play of the semester. At that moment, a lot of hands immediately went into the air because everyone wanted to get the leading roles. In reality, casting roles for the play was not an easy task. However, the children were delighted with it. But for the parents, it was a real war in which the stake was the pride of an aristocrat. So they didn't even talk to each other. Daphne said that their garden uses a rather unique method of assigning roles. She walked up to the canvas that was covering something and said that they had set a theme, and the children were giving a presentation. The one who could get the most votes became the main character. Seeing the concern on the parents' faces, she immediately said that in that case, she should have already announced this year's theme. She pulled the canvas off the board on which something was written and said that this theme was what I like. She said that in a few days, they would listen to presentations on this topic, and then they would be able to assign all the children to their roles. One of the mothers was very excited when she heard this. She said that this was the same topic that was predicted in the salon for Mom. They continued to talk among themselves, and she had long thought that no matter where she went, even in the world of romance, mothers always remained the same. Initially, the children's play faced a very negative reaction, since aristocrats, in their opinion, should not sing and dance. However, the children who played the leading role after entering the academy always became the student council presidents. And eventually, it became an arena of fierce competition leading up to the entrance exams. So this play was really famous among children. After the parents finally quieted down, she said that since it was time for them to start classes, she would ask that they all go home and the children go with her to class. The parents immediately began to disperse, and the girl sighed heavily and thought about how it took 3 hours to prepare all of this. And only 3 minutes passed before it was finished after the topic was announced. There were still 5 days left before all this. They promised to be tense, but Daphne still hoped for the best. After the parents began to disperse, Bante approached his older brother and said that he did not want to participate in all this at all. Being the main character was scary in his opinion, but his brother asked him if he would like to agree to take part in this, if he gave him 20 chocolates in return. The boy, hearing this, immediately became happy and said that of course, for such a quantity, he would definitely do anything. At that moment, Johann stroked his little sister's head and said that if Meline becomes the main character, she will definitely look like a real princess. When the emperor heard this, he told the captain that his sister was not a member of the imperial family, so she would definitely never become a princess. Johann nervously laughed and said that it was a really funny joke, and he also added that Meline had enough talent and ability to become the crown princess. But Norris was indignant again and said that for this, she would need to become even more valuable and undergo strict training. They continued to argue, and Daphne at this point also began to get angry because she had already asked them to leave, and they were only delaying her. Then the girl decided to take the initiative into her own hands. She started pushing them out and said that they needed to take the children to class, so they really needed to hurry up. After all the guardians and parents finally found themselves on the other side of the doors, Daphne turned to the children and asked if it was time for them to go to class yet. At that moment, Bantid suddenly ran up to her and said that her brother, I would say, would give him a lot of chocolate for getting this role. So he was in the mood. Daphne congratulated the boy on this and thought about the fact that a very long and exhausting journey awaited her ahead, but she had no choice. When evening came, the girl went to the market after work. She was looking for costumes that could be suitable for this play. She would really like to find a salesperson a little better than their usual one. So Daphne went into a new clothing store and said she was looking for children's outfits. As soon as she entered inside, she immediately heard a loud slap. Daphne was very wary. She did not understand why such sounds were heard in a children's store. But then suddenly, she heard a scream from one of the women and asked who said that her child could not become the main character, and hitting the other girl, told her to repeat it again. When Daphne went inside and saw these women, she immediately realized that they were the parents of the children from her class. She immediately panicked because she understood what this dispute was about. Another woman who was hit said that considering that the parents lack education, it is not surprising that their child is also terrible. They continued arguing and completely ignored the teacher. The other woman had already swung her arm to hit her opponent again. Daphne appeared right between them at that moment, and the woman ended up hitting her. As soon as she realized who it was, she immediately felt awkward. And the blow was so strong that it knocked the girl to the ground. The mothers immediately approached her, and seeing that it was the teacher Daphne, they immediately tried to help her stand up. At that moment, a red spot appeared on her cheek. The mother who hit her was very worried. She didn't know what to do now, and also asked if everything was okay with the girl. Daphne replied that she was completely fine, and also asked if the lady herself was injured. The girl did not even notice that blood was flowing from her nose from this blow. One of the mothers, noticing this, immediately told the teacher that she had a nosebleed, but she laughed and replied that she hadn't even noticed. And she also said that she was completely fine, so they didn't have to worry about her. However, at that moment, she said in a very stern voice that the children's performance, which should bring joy, had turned into a battlefield with crazy competition. The girl wiped the blood from her nose and said that they should consider canceling the play so that no one else would suffer, either physically or emotionally. As soon as the women heard this, they were very shocked. One of them said that this should not have been done. Her son should definitely become the president of the student council. Another one agreed with her and said that they could do anything except this. They really didn't want it all to be canceled. Daphne tried to stay calm and asked if the girls would continue to quarrel. The ladies demonstratively hugged each other to show that this would not happen again. They said that they had made peace and asked that the girl not cancel the performance under any circumstances. The teacher said that everything should be like this, because since the children are looking forward to this event, they should preserve it as long as possible. She said that they would not cancel it because of this little inconvenience and asked that such a thing not happen again. The teacher started to approach the exit and said that everything was great. It was time for her to go, and also asked if it was true that they would continue to communicate normally. The girls hugged each other again and said that, of course, everything would continue like this. They had a good relationship and they would not quarrel. Then the girl came out of this store. She took out a small white handkerchief and tried to stop the bleeding from her nose. At that moment, she felt how tired she was of all this. Even one parent is tiring enough at work, and here she was suddenly faced with several at once. And then she got a slap in the face. Of course, the girl would really like to go home and have a good rest. However, today she definitely needed to find a new seller for the suits, so she was going to repeat her search attempts. As I walked forward, I suddenly stopped in front of a very familiar place, looked at it for a while, and then remembered where I had seen it. In fact, this is the very building where she once called the Grand Duke Hilbert dear and pretended to be his wife. When she heard that they were engaged in the slave trade there, the girl was surprised that the search was over. However, as soon as she saw the open door, she immediately became wary. But at that moment, coming closer to the door, the girl heard some sounds from there. It sounded like a child's voice calling for its mother through tears. Of course, at first she couldn't believe that this could really be reality, because it broke her heart. But she began to come closer in order to check it out. And when she looked inside, she saw practically nothing. She was absolutely sure that she heard a child's voice. Therefore, she was shocked when in the dark room, she noticed only a staircase that led somewhere below. Daphne knew that she had to call someone. However, it could also be a very urgent matter. Perhaps the child needed help. So she did not have time to look for someone. She had to go there. So while going down the stairs, she held on to the cold stone wall for a long time so as not to fall, because it was very dark around. And then, by chance, the girl came across a small piece of paper. She didn't understand where this note could have come from. It was as if she was waiting for her to read it. So Daphne opened it and saw some signs and drawings on it. To any other person, they would have been incomprehensible. However, she immediately recognized them, because it was the cross of the temple. And even the magic circle, which looked very suspicious, folded the piece of paper and put it in her purse. She decided to take it with her just in case. Having gone down, she turned into the unknown and asked who was there. And at the same time, she felt a sharp, disgusting smell of blood. Daphne was about to say something else, but as soon as she saw the situation she now found herself in, she couldn't utter another word. The girl saw chains around that were all covered in blood, and also the floor was stained with children's blood. there really was a very large number of different chains and handcuffs around. Then, far away from her, she saw the silhouette of a person. Daphne understood that there was still someone left there, so she needed to run immediately. However, she felt as if someone was holding her ankles tightly, and because of this, she couldn't even take a step. Her body simply did not move, but the silhouette of this man continued to approach. Daphne even covered her mouth with her hand, so shocked was she. When this man finally came closer, she recognized him. After all, it was none other than Johann. The man sighed heavily, straightened his neck, and said that this was all very tiring. Of course, she certainly didn't expect to see him in this place, and, surprised, asked if it really was him. Johann smiled and said that, of course, it was him. He greeted the teacher and said that he didn't expect to see her in such a place. The girl said in a trembling voice that she actually did too, and he began to come closer to her and said that it could be very dangerous here, so he would like her to let him take her out of there. He said that her complexion was not very good, so this made him wary. He would like her to go out into the fresh air and come to her senses a little. He reached out with his hand to help her walk, but Daphne's reflex kicked in and she pulled his hand and even hit it. Seeing his surprised expression, the girl said that she was simply looking for a clothing store in different directions. The girl also said that this place was probably very dusty, and he could stain his clothes. So she pulled his hand away because she had been here for some time. Daphne also asked for forgiveness for her ignorant behavior. She laughed nervously and really hoped that he would say at least something so that the girl would stop worrying so much about the fact that she did something wrong. Finally, he spoke up and said that there were a lot of dangerous things in this place, and that slaves used to be bought and sold there. Daphne said that she knew it and wanted to make sure with her own eyes that this place was really finished and that there was no one there anymore. The man bowed slightly and said that everything was right. It was finished with him because he personally cleaned everything up, so she didn't have to worry. Daphne was worried. Johann looked very suspicious to her, so she said for the sake of decency that it was no wonder that Mylan liked cleaning the classroom so much. She took after her older brother. She also said that the man raised her very well. However, he suddenly removed the smile from his face and replied that there was a serious difference between them, since he was engaged in cleaning people. The girl tried to cheer him up. She said that he had removed the vile slave traders, and that meant that now she knew who had turned this place into ruins, because it was he. Johann just smiled back at her, but didn't say anything, which made her very wary again, and she just wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. Then the man spoke again. He said that he had only come in for a minute. While he was choosing a gift for Maylene, he was very interested in what her favorite thing was. Daphne was amazed by his ability to very quickly and subtly change the subject of the conversation. But at that moment, the man suddenly held out a small box and asked if she would like to look at what he had prepared for her. Daphne took it in her hands, examined it from all sides, and said that the music box is a very cute and really good gift. She smiled and said that she would probably like all of this, so he didn't have to worry. She would be happy to receive this thing. Johann also smiled and said that he also really hoped for that. And then, after a short but very uncomfortable silence, they were suddenly interrupted by another man who ran up to them and addressed the captain. He told him that they had finally found the escape routes for the escaped slave traders, and the guy immediately turned his attention to him and asked where they had found it. His assistant whispered that it might even be somehow connected with the saint. However, they didn't know for sure. Daphne couldn't hear anything because they were speaking really, really quietly. She was upset because she thought she should have known too, but Johann gave him some order and said that this was all they had to do to end the search, after which his assistant bowed and said that they would do so. The girl was upset that she had not heard a word, but then suddenly the guy turned to her and said that it would probably be better for them to move to another place. Daphne apologized to him and said that she had been chatting for too long in the middle of the night's work area, which made her feel awkward. She also said that because of her, he would definitely have problems, so she was already going to just leave in order not to delay him even more. But Johann suddenly came closer to her and said that he wanted to know if she would be against doing something together. Daphne asked what exactly he wanted. At that moment, she looked incredibly beautiful and attractive, But Johann suddenly felt his leg stick to the blood, and eventually he lowered his head and said that she could not pay attention to anything like that. He also wished her a safe journey and told her not to walk alone on dark streets for a long time. Daphne thanked him and said that in that case they would see each other again at the festival in the garden, after which she quickly climbed up the stairs and ran away. Johann remained standing in place. He suddenly noticed that there was some small piece of paper lying on the ground that wasn't there before. The guy immediately bent down and picked her up. After that, he saw this sign and sighed heavily and realized that the girl really did not cease to amaze him. And this girl, whom he said was a saint. After that, the man finished all his important business and also left from there. Eventually, time flowed inexorably, and finally, that very important day came. It was the day when the children had to tell their wife about their favorite things. The girl had absolutely no strength left because it had been several days of overtime work, and because of this, she could barely stand on her feet. But Daphne knew that she had to try her best for these children, so she gathered her courage and went inside where her students were already gathered. They all held various things in their hands. Then the girl stood in the middle of the hall and, turning to the children, asked if they were ready to present. The kids immediately screamed in agreement, but their guardians and parents screamed the loudest because they wanted to know the results the most. Daphne smiled and said that, in that case, she was ready to start announcing roles for the children's play that year. The children took turns coming out and naming their favorite things, the first of which was a boy with light green hair. He brought a small rag and said that it was a handkerchief that his mother had wiped his face since he was a baby, and that this was his favorite thing. The boy's mother, who was present in the hall, even burst into tears. She was incredibly pleased that Philip, her dear child, had actually chosen this very thing in order to talk about it. The boy said that he actually always carries this handkerchief with him and thinks about his mother, so it made him feel much calmer, especially in unfamiliar places. When Daphne listened to him, she thanked him for the presentation, after which she called the next student so as not to linger too long with this. Forward came a boy in glasses. He said that what he brought was an apple that he would grow himself. This boy was quite mysterious and said that if the end of the world comes, he will be able to plant this apple tree. Daphne, having heard all this, immediately thought about it, because it sounded somehow quite familiar to her. But she didn't dwell on all this, so she applauded the boy. She said that it was amazing. He had an excellent performance, and she was grateful to him for that. She herself was very happy that the children turned out to be pure and innocent. They did not humiliate or envy others' performances, but simply enjoyed everything that was happening. In fact, during the process, the children even exchanged toys because they found them quite interesting. Each told their story again in order to introduce their friend to this thing. Although 5-year-old children could easily be distracted, they still listened attentively to their friends' performances, and this touched Daphne to the depths of her soul. This is really very important in education. Then she called the next child, and it turned out to be Banteite. The boy was very worried, but he tried to look confident for the sake of his older brother. As soon as he stepped forward, the girl thought about the fact that even the Grand Duke would want Banteite to become the main character. So she immediately became interested in what he ultimately brought to show. The boy began to take out a very interesting thing from his pocket, and as soon as Daphne saw it, she immediately recognized it. And all because this thing turned out to be nothing other than chocolate, and the boy who had bitten the bar raised it up and was simply silent for a while. When he saw the interest in the faces of his classmates, he said that it was a chocolate bar. Daphne, at the same time, sighing heavily, could not believe that this was really the best thing he could choose. But the children were immediately delighted to see the sweets. They ran up to the boy and began to stretch out their little hands, saying that they would also like to try it. Daphne, as soon as she saw all this, immediately smiled at her. It became very similar to the distribution of hamburgers during the election of the class president. Some things definitely did not change regardless of where she was. When the boy finished his performance, she told everyone to return to their seats, after which she called Maxime to her and asked if he was ready. The girl said that it was time for him to speak, so they all wanted to hear what he would like to present. Maxime walked to the middle of the class and said that his favorite thing is the people of the empire. Daphne thought that this was just the right answer for a boy of his status, namely a prince. So she didn't say anything to him as a reprimand. At that moment, another hand flew into the air. It was Maylene's. She turned to the teacher and said that she would also like to perform in front of the children. Smiling, the girl replied that it was just her turn, so she invited the girl ahead. Daphne saw in her hands the very same music box that the captain of the knights had bought. The girl assumed that Maylene wanted to show it off because it was incredibly beautiful. But as soon as the girl came forward, she put this thing aside and said that what she loved most of all was their sweet teacher. She ran closer to her and hugged her and said that she really loved her the most. Daphne did not expect this and immediately laughed and hugged her back. However, the other children began to be indignant and told Melon that it was unfair because they also really liked their teacher. Many of them even decided to change their favorite thing and said that they really loved the teacher. Daphne tried to calm them down, although she did not succeed right away. Of course, the girls were very pleased, and she was glad that they loved her so much. However, at this rate, they would definitely rip her skirt off. After all, the children were drawn to her in order to show who loved her more. And so, after a short turmoil, the main character was chosen as a result of a secret vote of the children themselves. And when everything was finished, Daphne was ready to announce who it was. The mothers immediately began to worry. They really wanted it to be their child. But Daphne, having counted all the votes, said that now it was known who would be the main character in this year's play. And this person was Bounty-Eyed himself. She congratulated the boy and said that he would play the main role. The guy who was sitting on the ground at that moment and continued to eat his chocolate bar was very surprised. The children began to applaud him, some sincerely and some even envied him. Well, Daphne turned to him and said that they all had to congratulate Bounty-Eye, but he was a great guy. But then suddenly, Philip burst into tears. He said that he should have been the main character. He had the best performance, so he thought it was all unfair. Daphne approached the boy and tried to calm him down. She said that in the play, not only the main character shines, everyone could shine brightly on stage in order to be remembered, but he still wanted to play the role of the main character. The girl herself thought at that moment that she just had to look at the little Bounty-Eyed who didn't understand anything, and then Philip would definitely understand everything, because even villains can have charisma equal to the main character. Then suddenly, Philip heard the voice of a boy who turned to him and said that he could take his role as the main character because he didn't want to. He was scared. Ben Tate replied that he would not be at all against it if it was the main character. Daphne was very surprised to hear this. She asked the boy if he really didn't want this role. The guy, looking at Philip, said that everything was exactly like that, but the girl herself was very surprised because no one had ever refused the role of the main character, even in a play. But she couldn't, of course, force him to take part, so she just turned to Philip and asked him to properly thank Bounty-Eyed for this. The boy was genuinely surprised. He didn't expect everything to happen like this, so with a trembling voice, he thanked his classmate for this. Daphne decided to change the subject so that no one else would burst into tears. She said that thanks to the Bounty's compliance, Philippe was now becoming the main character after that. She asked if they wanted to hear the names of the actors playing the other roles. The children immediately supported her and expected to hear their name, but Daphne herself was amazed that the Bounty-Eyed, who was supposed to follow the path of the villain, later turned out to be a rather kind little boy. She believed that she would also have to work hard in order to keep up, but soon Daphne became very tired of all this, and all because she had to organize a game on the narrow bridge. You had to draw a line on the floor and imagine that it was a narrow bridge with a full-flowing river flowing under it. Two children who came to this bridge from different ends played out what they would do in such a situation. This is a simple warm-up to assess the acting skills and personality of the children. However, when Maylene stood in front of Maxion, they, of course, began to quarrel again. The children fought and swore. They even called each other horrible names. Daphne was so tired that even without interest, she simply separated them in different directions by inertia. The girl told them to stop fighting. In fact, the tough rehearsal schedule with 5-year-old children, whose behavior was completely unpredictable, took up even more work and time. No matter how many years passed, she still experienced these torments of labor. Despite the fact that she was already in a completely different world for herself, the difficulties remained the same. After Daphne separated Moxion and Malin, another couple came forward and also started to quarrel. It was a blonde girl, Aristia. She was from the older group. She stood in front of the pool and said that she was very glad that they met again. Aristia introduced herself and said that she was going to take revenge on him for beating her in the vote for the role of the main character. The boy was a little surprised when he heard this. He said that he just wanted to cross over to the other side and was not even going to fight with her. Daphne stood in front of them and really hoped that these children would not fight because she did not want to separate them. But at that moment, the girl suddenly pretended to take something out of her pocket. She pulled her empty palm to him and said that she had chocolate that the boy loved so much. Bantate, of course, didn't see anything there. He said that there was nothing there, so he didn't understand where she could have seen the chocolate bar there. The girl was apparently very angry about this. She asked, "How is this possible? It is chocolate that only good children can see." She asked Banta, was he really a bad child, and that is why he could not see? But she came closer to him and asked if he would like to just take it and finally give way to her. The boy didn't know what to do. He was very sorry that he didn't see this chocolate, and that meant that he was a bad child. In the end, Bantit sighed heavily and said that he was a good child, so he took the invisible chocolate bar from her and was about to give way. As soon as Daphne saw all this, she was sincerely amazed. She realized that this girl had started to train him, and of course, she didn't like it at all. Aristia smiled and said that he had behaved well, and now he had to step aside. The boy immediately did so. He stood at the very edge of the white line in order to let her go ahead. But this line turned out to be too small, and in the end, the boy could not stay on his feet and simply fell. And the girl, without even turning her head back, walked past him. The boy turned to the teacher and said that he had fallen into the water. Daphne immediately ran up to him. She said that she would save him right now. After all, it was necessary to maintain the illusion that all this was real. The emperor, who was standing nearby at that moment and watching everything that was happening, sighed heavily and said in a quiet voice that now he was definitely worried about the future of the empire. Daphne immediately told him not to say something like that, because at that age children fall quite often. This was completely normal. She replied that this was a natural process of growing up. She immediately thought that it was the brother of the pool itself. However, then she realized that his voice was very different. The girl immediately turned to the side and saw that it was not Kaiden at all. It was the emperor. She was very surprised and did not understand what he was doing in this place. Eventually, she realized that he would want to talk to her, so she took the girl by the hand and led him to the side onto the street so that the children would not hear what they would talk about. Daphne turned to His Majesty and asked what brought him to kindergarten in general. Norris, whose hand even hurt a little from how hard she was squeezing it, said that she had very strong hands. This paralyzed him. After that, he asked if the girl had ever thought about becoming an imperial knight. She definitely had the talent for it. Daphne didn't like the fact that he changed the subject of the conversation. She apologized to him for being rude and said that the sudden appearance of an adult could frighten the children, especially if it was the emperor, of course. She asked if something had happened to Axion, since he had come in broad daylight, especially during their rehearsal. The man said in a calm voice that this was not so. He had already said before that he was simply worried about the future of the empire. Norris explained that he thought that by clearing his head, he would be able to work better. He asked the girl, smiling, whether she was going to accidentally treat him to a cup of tea, because he certainly would not refuse it. Daphne was amazed and even a little scared. She laughed nervously and asked why you were thinking about the future of the empire in kindergarten. But then suddenly, the girl remembered the words she said when she was in the imperial palace checking the territory, that if he came, she would pour him some tea. But she had one condition. Of course, he had to get permission from the director. Remembering this, Daphne turned to the man and asked if he had this permission. Norris smiled smugly and said that everything had already been received. The director proudly agreed to this. That's why he came to this place. Daphne had no other choice. She sighed heavily and said that they would see each other in the meeting room as soon as the children finished their practice. She definitely couldn't free herself before. That's when, after some time, The girl finally got free and came to the meeting room. As soon as she went inside, she saw a lot of different desserts that were on the table. The girl was amazed to see this quantity. In fact, she knew that the Simpson Soleon dessert set was famous for being almost impossible to get, even if you stood in line for a very long time. So of course she was surprised to see these desserts. But Norris, seeing her expression, smiled and said that he was not particularly fond of sweets. So it was all for her. The girl immediately bowed and said that he should definitely come more often. In fact, Daphne was very amazed because she had never tried such precious desserts. The man also stood up from his seat and told her to sit down and relax. However, looking at her, he saw that she had already managed to sit down and picked up a dessert spoon and fork in order to try these sweets. But at that moment, he suddenly walked around the table to the other side, and Sev, sitting next to her, asked if everything would be okay with her. Norris explained that if they found out that they were spending time alone in kindergarten, he would have some concerns that various dirty rumors might start. Norris explained that, of course, he would deal with any scandal. But he didn't know whether Daphne was worried about it, because after all, it could have affected her reputation. The girl, of course, didn't even think about it. She tried for some time to understand why he suddenly decided to talk about it, and after eating dessert, she nevertheless turned to the man. Daphne said that after all, the principal had given his permission and the other teachers had already gone home, so there was no need to worry about all this. The man, hearing this, was even a little upset. He said that it was a pity, and then asked, "By the way, have you thought about replacing these uncomfortable chairs?" Daphne replied that they had spare, more comfortable ones in the teacher's room, and asked if he would like her to bring them to him so that everything would be comfortable. But the man replied that it was not worth doing this. He came only to look at a place that he would visit often. When Daphne heard about this, she was genuinely shocked. She asked what exactly he meant when he said this. Norris asked if she even knew anything about the Emperor's problem. One time would definitely not be enough to clarify her thoughts. So, moving closer to her, he suddenly made his voice very quiet and said that from that moment on, he would definitely count on her. Daphne felt very uncomfortable about this. Of course, she understood that such close meetings and contacts would be completely unacceptable. And she didn't want all of this. Then she said in a slightly detached voice that it was probably already easy to ask him to leave. The man laughed and said that she had a pretty good sense of humor. He didn't even realize that she wasn't joking when she said that. When some time had passed since then, new problems arose because the play was approaching and they had new difficulties. One of the teachers, who was a full-fledged woman, even fainted because she could no longer withstand all this preparation. Then another teacher told Daphne's teacher that there was a big typo in all the invitations to the festival. The workshop said that they would not be able to sew the clothes on time. They did not know what to do at all. After all, there was something wrong with the order in the plan, and accordingly, everything was failing. As soon as the girl heard about this, she understood that these were serious problems. She decided that perhaps she, too, should have fainted from fatigue, as the other teacher had done. She just wanted to relax in a way that respected the law and protected workers' rights. However, overtime did not leave her alone, and she had to work and worry all the time. But Daphne knew that if she gave up now, the festival would really not be organized properly. So, with the last of her strength, she was going to correct all the mistakes and finally implement it. Finally, gathering her strength, she told the other teachers to take the teacher Felena to the infirmary. They also had to contact the printing house to file a complaint and tell them to immediately reprint everything. After that, Daphne said that they would place the order with a new workshop that would be able to meet the deadline, even if the costume design was slightly different from their original idea. The girl said that she had already made a list of workshops and would also review the plans again and correct the schedule. She began to do all this and distribute new responsibilities to others so that they could all do everything together. The teachers were amazed as soon as they saw her reaction and said that she was truly amazing. The kindergarten workers were motivated. They decided not to give up because of overtime and to continue moving forward towards the festival, because a lot of work had already been done. So it was impossible to give up halfway. Daphne motivated them all and finally told them to give it their all for this festival, and then they could relax and enjoy life. So, despite one misfortune after another, time continued its course. And finally, soon that very kindergarten festival was to arrive. The stage props were finally completely ready. Everything was perfect, and one of Daphne's assistants asked if the preparations for this event were already completely finished. The girl who was controlling all the processes finally breathed a sigh of relief and said that it really was like that. The preparation was finished. When everything was finally ready and the day of the performance arrived, the girl was holding a large purple magic ball in her hands. And in the hall, there were already a lot of parents who came to look at their beautiful children. Daphne turned to them and thanked everyone present for their patient waiting. She said that soon the light would go out and it would become dark, so they should be careful and that they would move around in case of anything. The children who were standing backstage and heard this were in anticipation. They were really waiting for the performance to start in order to show their dear parents what they were capable of. The parents themselves were also worried. They were interested in what awaited them in the performance. A special artist was also invited. One of the mothers came up to him and said that as soon as her child was born, he had to draw it very well. The man explained that he had already been invited to the festival in the kindergarten several times, so they did not have to worry about anything. He would do everything in the best possible way. At this point, everyone was talking and waiting for the show to begin, and finally, the lights went out and the hall became completely silent in anticipation. It was the biggest event of the semester at the nursery, and the time when the staff suffered the most. Built on the blood of flesh and the tears of all those involved, the kindergarten festival was finally beginning, and the light was directed at Daphne. She addressed everyone present and said that their performance could begin. At that moment, the door to the room suddenly opened, and the girl saw that some knights suddenly began to approach them. She was very wary when she saw this. She didn't understand what the knights from the great temple were doing in this place. This was her scarecrow. These knights approached her recently, asked them for forgiveness for disturbing her. However, she said that this was a kindergarten, so she did not understand for what reason the armed soldiers decided that they had the right to enter there. But the knight turned to Lady Daphne and pointed his weapon at her and said that they had received serious reports that she was a black mage. So they said that she had to go with them. The girl, hearing about this, was very surprised. She did not understand what they were talking about and how this was possible. The people around were also amazed because one of the knights approached the girl from behind and began to arrest her. They understood that these were the personal knights of the saint. Nobody understood how this could happen and why they talked about black magic. Giving Us immediately screamed at the knight and said that she does not know about any black magic. The girl did not understand what they were doing and what report they were talking about. She considered it all complete nonsense. But one of the knights said that the saint personally called her name, so they were obliged to respond to this complaint. As soon as Daphne heard about this, she could not believe that Lilia, her sister, really did this. The knight told the lady to submit to arrest and cooperate with the investigation, otherwise it would end even worse for her. Daphne immediately started yelling at them. She said that she was not some kind of black magician, and that it was all slander. But the knights did not want to listen to her. They said that she could tell the saint about it personally. It did not concern them at all. They were simply following orders. People heard practically nothing. They only saw how the teacher began to be led out of the room, and this frightened them even more. Daphne immediately understood that she had no choice. She had to cooperate with them. The girl tried to put pressure on the sting and said that if the children saw that they were dragging her, they would be scared. She asked them to let her go. She could easily go on her own. But the knights only squeezed her hands even harder and said that it was definitely not up to her to decide. They didn't know what trick she might pull to escape, so they had to hold her personally. As soon as the children who were standing behind the scenes saw this, they immediately became scared. Meline turned to Maxion and asked how he could look so calm. She told him to quickly take some action and free the teacher because he was a prince. From the boy's voice, you could tell that he was actually nervous too. He said that they were knights of the temple and that this girl had to deal with them because she was from the temple. But Malin shouted loudly and said that her father was now very far away and was treating people. And Maxion replied that he said that he was too busy, so none of them could help their teacher. Bantate was nearby with the other children at the time and was eating his chocolate bar when he heard the voice of his older brother, who came up to him. The boy immediately turned to his brother and asked what would happen to their dear teacher now. He was really very scared. Soon after this, Daphne was taken to a rather remote place. It was some kind of tower. She was locked there and chained to a chair. The girl immediately felt a strong headache. However, she did not say anything since she was brought to this place, because she understood that it would be safer for herself. Then the door to her cell opened and Lily came in. She turned to the knight and asked if they really couldn't keep this place clean. This all really irritated her, but the knight said that he would immediately fix everything for the saint. The girl no longer paid attention to him because she saw her little sister. Seeing her expression, Lilia said that apparently the road to this place was very difficult for her. But Daphne did not look as friendly as her sister. She turned to the saint and asked them to get straight to the point. Why did the girl say that she was a black magician? Daphne also added that even if it were true, she did not understand how she could treat an aristocrat like that, and she told Lila that apparently the girl had become completely fearless since she had done something like that. The saint sighed heavily and made a surprised expression on her face. She said that she came only because she was worried about her sister. But now, when she heard that Daphne called herself an aristocrat, she laughed and said that it was very stupid of her to think so. The girl moved closer to her and said that she had recently discovered another talent in herself. Her father, of course, was delighted with this. Laughing, Lillian said that she still had no talent, and she pretended that she was very sorry, although this was certainly not the case. Daphne thought about how she had just recently defeated the most dangerous monster. Although it was considered that she certainly shouldn't talk about it now, so she kept it to herself. And all because now the most important thing was to talk Lily's teeth. She smiled and turned to her sister and told her to think very carefully and thoroughly. She wondered if Lillian might have been mistaken about Daphne being a black magician. She had always been prone to making mistakes, and apparently this had not been corrected over time. The girl also said that, for example, she always pretends that she is the real daughter of their family, although objectively this was not the case. When Lily heard this, she was very shocked and asked in a trembling voice what the girl was saying. Daphne liked that she was able to bring out her emotions, so smiling, she asked if you had already been entered into the family register. Just don't say no, because you so desperately wanted it. Her sister, hearing about this, became completely angry. She swung her hand at the girl and asked how she even dared to say such a thing. But at that moment, Daphne didn't even blink. The saint looked at the raised hand and realized that she shouldn't have done that, so lowering it down, she told the girl to just forget about it. After this, Lilia smiled happily and said that she was grateful to her sister for being as arrogant as always. She said that without the slightest feeling of guilt, she demands to explain why she was considered a black magician. This surprised her. Daphne didn't understand why she was saying this, because nothing could surprise her anymore. She could expect anything from her sister. But at that moment, Lily suddenly took out a small piece of paper and asked if she remembered this piece of paper. At first, Daphne didn't understand why she suddenly had to remember this. However, then she remembered how she went down into the dungeon, saw him, and took him along with her. The girl immediately asked her sister where she got it from. The saint smiled joyfully and replied that she herself had left it there, and if the black magician touched it, then of course she could immediately recognize it. Daphne screamed and said that she had already been like that before she touched him. Lillian said that she did it and asked if the girl really didn't understand. She explained to her sister that he reacted at the moment when the girl touched him, so she found out about it accordingly and made similar conclusions. Daphne was incredibly angry when she heard this. She did not understand what kind of nonsense her stepsister was talking about. But Lillian suddenly called the knights to her and said that they had found some rather suspicious items among her things.